I am Zariah, 28 years old and a financial risk analyst. For 4 years, my parents called every job I applied to and told them I had a criminal record. I was homeless for 7 months, sleeping in a freezing car while they attended country club galas. My father would text me to come home, beg for forgiveness, and maybe he would stop destroying my life. Then one night, a strange woman tapped on my window. She told me my grandmother hired her 9 years ago to find me when things got bad enough. What she handed me changed my life and destroyed theirs. Before I continue, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever fought toxic family members. Sleeping in a beaten-up Honda Civic in Chicago is unforgiving. I pulled the blanket tighter, watching my breath form clouds in the dark. My phone screen lit up, shattering the darkness. An automated email from a top financial firm appeared. The subject line read, "Job offer rescinded." My heart hammered as I opened the message. "Due to a failed background check, we are withdrawing our offer of employment." A suffocating weight pressed down on my chest. I had passed 5 rounds of interviews. I had aced their risk assessment tests. There was absolutely nothing on my background check to raise a red flag. A text message popped up on my screen. It was from my father, Reginald. The cruel text message read, "I told the firm in Chicago you embezzled from us. Come home, kneel in front of Preston and Chantel, apologize, and maybe I will stop destroying your life." His audacity made my blood boil. Reginald and Vivica, my parents, were part of the wealthy, status-obsessed elite back in Atlanta. They cared more about their pristine image and expanding their generational wealth than they ever cared about their own flesh and blood. My crime in their eyes was simple. I refused to play their twisted, manipulative games and be a pawn. 4 years ago, they tried to force me into an arranged marriage to merge business interests. When I refused, they disowned me. But simply cutting me off was not enough for them. They wanted me entirely broken. My older sister Chantel was always considered the flawless golden child of the household. Vain, manipulative, and desperate for validation from high society. She married Preston, a smug white man from a declining old money family. Preston was secretly draining my family resources to pay off his own bankrupt estate, and my parents were too blinded by their desire for elite validation to see it. My father sabotaged my career, making sure I stayed destitute until I crawled back. I stared at the glowing text message, feeling a dangerous mix of absolute despair and fiery rage. I threw my phone hard against the passenger seat, watching the cracked screen splinter even further. I refused to give up. I refused to let Reginald win. I would rather freeze in this Civic than ever bow down to Preston and Chantel. Suddenly, a sharp tap on my frost-covered window made me jump. I turned, expecting to see a police officer telling me to move my car. Instead, standing in the bitter cold, was a sharp black woman in her 60s, wearing an immaculately tailored trench coat. Her posture demanded absolute respect. I rolled down the window, just a crack, bracing myself for the worst. The freezing wind whipped into the car, but the woman did not even flinch. She reached into her coat and slid a thick leather-bound dossier through the narrow opening. I stared at it, confused. "Your grandma Josephine hired me 9 years ago to watch you?" The woman said, her voice crisp and commanding. "I am Ms. Holloway, a private investigator and the executor of her secret trust. My grandmother Josephine was the self-made matriarch of our family, a fierce, brilliant woman who built a real estate empire from absolutely nothing. She passed away when I was 19, and I missed her every single day. She was the only one who saw right through my parents' greed." Ms. Holloway looked me dead in the eye. She said to wait until they completely broke you. "It is time." Ms. Holloway turned and walked away into the dark winter night, without another word, leaving me alone with the heavy leather folder. My hands shook violently as I opened it. I expected to find a check or maybe some emergency cash to help me get a hotel room for the night. I peeled back the thick cover. It was not cash. It was a stack of legal documents bearing the official seal of the state of Georgia. I pulled out the top paper and read the bold print at the heading. It was the master deed to Josephine Tower. My breath hitched in my throat. Josephine Tower was the massive commercial skyscraper in the heart of downtown Atlanta. It was the exact building where my family investment firm operated. It was the crown jewel of my parents' supposedly massive empire. I traced my trembling fingers over the embossed letters, feeling the air begin to warm. They had been living in a fortress that actually belonged to the daughter they threw onto the streets. My mind raced. I was no longer a homeless outcast. I was the landlord of the very people who were actively trying to ruin my life and silence me forever. A dangerous smile crept across my face. My father wanted me to come home and apologize. I decided right then and there that I would absolutely go home, but I would not be kneeling. I typed a single response. I will see you very soon. The very sick, twisted games they had played with my life were officially permanently over. It was finally time for me to take my entire empire back. The sharp click of my heels echoed across the imported Italian marble of the main lobby. My posture was rigid and my gaze was fixed straight ahead as I strode through the expansive space. If anyone were watching from the floor, they would see the sharp, determined rhythm of my stride before looking upward to witness the breathtaking scale of Josephine Tower. Glass and steel stretched 50 stories into the Atlanta sky, casting a massive shadow over the downtown financial district. For years I had looked at this building as the fortress that locked me out. My parents had used this very architecture to intimidate me, to remind me of the wealth and power I was supposedly throwing away by refusing to bend to their will. Now I knew the absolute truth. It was my fortress. I walked past the sprawling mahogany security desk, bypassing the visitor log entirely. The head security guard, a broad-shouldered man who had previously escorted me out of this very building under my father's strict orders, stepped forward to block my path. He opened his mouth to tell me I was trespassing. I did not slow my pace. I simply handed him a stamped, certified legal document that Miss Holloway had prepared for me that morning. He read the bold print, and his face instantly drained of color. He stepped back, clearing the path without uttering a single word. I stepped into the private executive elevator and pressed the button for the penthouse boardroom. My pulse was steady and my breathing was calm. The terrifying fear that had kept me shivering in a freezing car for 7 months was completely eradicated. It had been replaced by a cold, calculating fire. The elevator doors slid open silently on the 50th floor. I strode down the plush, carpeted hallway toward the double mahogany doors of the main boardroom. The corporate human resources representative had told me over the phone to arrive promptly at 10 o'clock for an in-person interview. I pushed open the heavy wooden doors, fully expecting to see a panel of corporate recruiters ready to grill me. Instead, sitting around the massive custom-built conference table was my absolute worst nightmare. My father, Reginald, sat at the head of the table, adjusting his silk tie with an air of absolute authority. My mother, Vivica, sat immediately to his right, dripping in designer jewelry, bought with money she did not actually own. Across from them sat my older sister Chantel, checking her makeup in her phone screen, while her husband Preston lounged in his leather chair with a deeply arrogant smirk plastered across his face. It was a complete and total ambush. There was no human resources representative, there was no legitimate job interview. This was just another meticulously calculated opportunity for them to break my spirit. Vivica stood up slowly. Her eyes raked over my appearance with absolute disgust, taking in the simple clothes I had been forced to wear while living in my car. She reached down beside her chair and picked up a folded gray bundle. With a sharp flick of her wrist, she slid it across the long, polished mahogany table. The fabric glided across the smooth surface and stopped right in front of me. I looked down at the bundle. It was a janitorial uniform. A cheap polyester shirt with a plastic name tag reading maintenance. "We told the corporate board about your extensive criminal record, Zariah," my mother said, her voice dripping with lethal poison. "The exact record we fabricated to keep you completely unemployable in this city. You have 2 choices today. Put on that mop uniform and clean the toilets in my building, or walk right back out into the freezing cold and stay homeless for the rest of your pathetic life." Chantel let out a sharp, cruel laugh that echoed off the glass walls. "You really thought you were getting a senior analyst position here. You are the black sheep, Zariah. You refused to marry the man Dad chose for you to elevate our status. You refused to merge our wealth with the mayor's family. You chose to act like you were better than us, and look exactly where it got you. Begging for a menial job at the very firm you abandoned. Put the uniform on and finally learn your place." They sat there waiting for me to break. They expected the tears, the begging, the desperate pleas for familial mercy. That was the reaction they had aggressively conditioned me to give since childhood. Whenever I outperformed Chantel in academics, my father would ground me. Whenever I bought my own clothes with money from my part-time jobs, my mother would donate them to charity to remind me who held the power. But the woman standing in front of them today was not the broken daughter they had worked so hard to manufacture. I did not yell. I did not cry. I calmly reached out and pushed the gray janitorial uniform off the edge of the table. It hit the floor with a soft, dismissive thud. Then I walked slowly and deliberately past my mother and my sister. I walked straight past Preston, who narrowed his eyes in sudden confusion. I did not stop until I reached the opposite head of the table. I pulled out the heavy leather executive chair and sat down, crossing my legs with absolute authority. Reginald slammed his open hand flat against the mahogany surface, causing the coffee cups to rattle. "What do you think you are doing? Get out of that chair immediately. That seat is reserved strictly for the owner of this firm." I smiled, maintaining direct, unblinking eye contact with the man who had frozen my bank accounts and destroyed my professional reputation. I reached into the designer leather tote bag I had retrieved from the bank vault that morning and pulled out the thick, heavy financial ledger. I slammed it down onto the center of the table. The loud crack echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. "I know exactly who this seat belongs to, Dad," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "And I know exactly what you and Preston have been doing behind these closed doors." Preston scoffed, leaning forward in his chair and rolling his eyes. He looked at my parents with a performative, exaggerated sigh. "Reginald, Vivica, why are we entertaining this delusion? She is clearly having a psychotic break from living on the streets." He reached over and pressed the intercom button built into the center of the table. "Security, we need armed guards up to the penthouse boardroom immediately. We have a hostile trespasser refusing to leave the premises." Preston leaned back, crossing his arms behind his head, acting like the ultimate white savior of the black family business. "You are completely done, Zariah," he sneered, revealing his true colors. "You have no money, no power, and no standing in this building. I will make sure the police lock you up in a cell for corporate trespassing." I did not even flinch at his threat. I casually picked up my cell phone from the table and looked directly into Preston's eyes. "You really should check your spending limits before you threaten the person who actually owns the bank, Preston." I tapped a single button on my screen, activating the total financial freeze Ms. Holloway and I had legally established just 30 minutes prior. A loud, sharp buzz instantly cut through the tense silence of the boardroom. Preston looked down at his wrist in annoyance, his Apple Watch screen illuminated with a bright, flashing red notification. I watched the color completely drain from his smug face as his eyes widened in sheer panic. The notification read, "Transaction declined, corporate account frozen." Preston tapped the glass face of his watch frantically. The loud buzzing stopped, but the glowing red text remained burned into the screen. He pulled his latest model iPhone from his tailored suit jacket pocket, his fingers trembling slightly as he opened his banking application. The screen refreshed only to display a completely zeroed-out balance and a red lock icon. He swallowed hard, the Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. Chantel noticed his sudden silence. She frowned, her perfect manicured brows drawing together in annoyance. "Preston? What is it?" she demanded. "Tell security to drag her out so we can go to lunch. The boutique is holding a dress for me." Preston did not answer her. He could not even look at her. His eyes were locked on me, filled with a sudden, terrifying realization. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the heavy mahogany table. I laced my fingers together and let a slow, satisfied smile spread across my face. Your limitless black card was tied directly to the Josephine Trust, Preston, I said, my voice slicing through the thick silence of the boardroom. The very same trust that I legally activated just 30 minutes ago. Chantel let out an irritated sigh, crossing her arms over her designer blouse. What on earth are you talking about, Zariah? Dad owns this firm. Dad controls the accounts. You do not own anything but the dirty clothes on your back. I ignored my sister entirely, keeping my gaze locked on her husband. For 3 years, Preston, you have been siphoning millions of dollars from this firm. You set up shell companies masked as international consulting vendors. You forged invoices for services that were never rendered. You took the generational wealth my black grandmother built from the ground up, and you funneled it directly into your own father's bankrupt estate. You drained our family dry, just to save your declining old money white family from absolute financial ruin. Preston's face turned a sickly shade of pale. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a strangled stutter came out. Chantel looked at him, her face contorting in confusion. "Preston, tell her she is crazy," Chantel demanded, her voice rising in pitch. "Tell her that is a lie." "It is a lie," Preston choked out, finally finding his voice, though it lacked all its usual arrogant confidence. "Reginald, she is a hacker. She must have breached the firm's servers. She is a desperate homeless criminal trying to extort us. Call the police right now." I flipped open the heavy leather ledger I had placed on the table. I did not need to hack anything, Preston. Grandmother Josephine kept meticulous analog records, and Ms. Holloway has spent the last 9 years cross-referencing every single digital transaction you made against these original ledgers. I looked over at my father. Reginald was sitting frozen in his oversized leather chair. His face was a mask of pure horror, but the horror was not directed at Preston. It was directed at me. "You knew," I said, turning the full force of my anger onto my father. "You knew he was stealing from the family, and you signed off on every single fraudulent wire transfer. You gave him the keys to the vault. Why? Because Preston's father sponsored your membership to the most exclusive restricted country club in Atlanta. Because you wanted the elite white society of this city to accept you so desperately that you literally paid them to tolerate your presence. You sold out your own mother's legacy just to play golf with men who laugh at you behind your back." Reginald's face flushed a deep, furious purple. The vein in his forehead bulged as his carefully constructed facade of power completely shattered. "You ungrateful little wretch!" he roared, his voice echoing violently off the glass walls of the boardroom. "I built this empire. I am the patriarch of this family. You are nothing but a liar and a thief. You come into my building spouting nonsense to ruin your sister's marriage." He pushed his heavy chair back so violently it crashed into the credenza behind him. Reginald lunged across the polished mahogany table, his hands outstretched like claws aimed directly at my throat. A crystal water pitcher toppled over, shattering against the wood and sending ice water spilling across the financial ledgers. I did not flinch. I did not move a single muscle. Right before his hands could reach me, the massive double doors of the boardroom swung open with a deafening crash. Reginald froze mid-lunge, his hands suspended in the air. Stepping into the room was Ms. Holloway. She was no longer wearing her winter trench coat. She was dressed in a sharp charcoal business suit, radiating absolute authority. Flanking her on either side were 2 massive, heavily armed private security guards. Their hands rested casually but deliberately on the holsters at their waists. "Take your hands off my client immediately," Ms. Holloway commanded, her voice ringing out with chilling precision. Reginald slowly lowered his arms, his eyes darting nervously between the armed guards and Ms. Holloway. He stumbled backwards, sinking into his chair. Ms. Holloway stepped up to the table, placing a certified legal injunction right over the spilled ice water. "As the executor of the Josephine Trust, I am formally notifying you that Reginald Wilson is no longer recognized as a tenant or managing director of this facility," she announced. "Effective immediately, Zariah Wilson is the sole controlling shareholder of Josephine Tower and all associated financial entities. You have exactly 1 hour to clear your personal belongings from this office before these gentlemen escort you to the street." The silence that followed was absolute. The reality of their destruction was finally settling in. Preston was staring at his frozen phone screen in total shock. Chantel was hyperventilating, clutching her designer bag as if it might protect her. But it was my mother Vivica who finally broke the silence. Vivica stood up, her hands trembling so violently her diamond bracelets clinked against each other. Her eyes were wide with pure, unadulterated panic. "You cannot do this," she blurted out, her voice cracking with desperation. "You cannot freeze those accounts, Zariah. We just mortgaged this entire floor. We took out a massive bridge loan against the building just to fund Chantel's charity gala tonight. The caterers, the venue, the press. If those checks bounce, we will be the laughingstock of the entire city. We will be ruined." I looked at my mother, taking in her sheer terror. She was not worried about the theft. She was not worried about my father's crimes. She was only worried about looking poor in front of her high society friends. I stood up slowly, smoothing out the wrinkles in my simple clothes. I closed the heavy leather ledger and tucked it securely under my arm. I looked directly into Vivica's panicked eyes and let a cold, brilliant smile touch my lips. "I know," I said softly, making sure every single syllable landed with devastating impact. "I will be attending." The heavy glass doors of Maison de Luxe in Buckhead glided open. I walked into the ultra-exclusive luxury boutique with my shoulders pulled back and my head held high. The crystal chandeliers caught the light, casting a warm and expensive glow over racks of custom silk and imported velvet. The air smelled of fresh lilies and high-end perfume. I ignored the lingering stares of the wealthy housewives who were browsing the latest designer collections. My eyes were completely fixed on a breathtaking emerald green evening gown displayed in the center of the pristine showroom. It was elegant and powerful. It was exactly the armor I needed for tonight. Before I could even reach out to touch the delicate fabric, a shrill voice echoed across the quiet boutique. "What is she doing in here?" Chantel stepped out from behind a rack of designer winter coats, her face twisted in pure, unfiltered disgust. My mother Vivica was right behind her, clutching a flute of complimentary champagne. They had apparently rushed straight here from the corporate boardroom to indulge in luxury retail therapy to calm their nerves. They were completely in denial of the absolute financial ruin I had just handed them less than an hour ago. Vivica marched directly up to the boutique manager, a tall, thin white woman with a severely pinned back bun. "Margaret, you need to call security immediately," Vivica demanded, pointing a perfectly manicured finger right at my chest. "That woman is a homeless criminal. She has an extensive record for corporate embezzlement, and she is clearly trespassing in this high-end store. I demand you remove her before she steals something valuable from your displays." Margaret looked me up and down. Her eyes darted from my practical worn street clothes to the pristine emerald gown I was now holding in my hands. She stepped toward me with a tight, condescending smile. "Miss, I am going to have to ask you to leave," Margaret said, her voice dripping with fake corporate politeness. "This is a private clientele establishment, and we do not tolerate disturbances of any kind. Please exit the premises before I am forced to involve the local authorities." I did not back away. I kept my grip firmly on the emerald gown. "I am not causing a disturbance, Margaret," I replied, my voice perfectly level and unbothered. "I am simply shopping for a high-end dress to wear to a charity gala later tonight." Chantel let out a loud, mocking laugh, drawing the immediate attention of several prominent Atlanta socialites who were browsing nearby. "You going to a charity gala?" Chantel sneered, stepping aggressively into my personal space. "You sleep in a freezing Honda Civic, Zariah. You could not even afford the zipper on that dress, let alone the entire gown itself." "Margaret, I want that green dress. Box it up for me. I am buying it right now just so she cannot even look at it anymore." Chantel aggressively snatched the heavy silk gown right out of my hands and marched over to the polished marble checkout counter. She pulled out Preston's secondary platinum credit card and slammed it down hard on the glass surface. "Ring it up," Chantel commanded, flipping her long hair over her shoulder and glaring at me with a triumphant, entitled smirk. "Let us show this vagrant what real money actually looks like." I slowly walked over to the marble counter and stood right next to her. I did not say a single word. I just waited. Margaret picked up the heavy metal credit card and inserted it into the processing terminal. The machine whirred quietly for a second. Then it let out a loud, harsh electronic beep. "Declined." The sound echoed perfectly in the dead-quiet boutique. Several wealthy women standing over at the jewelry counter turned their heads to look directly at us. Chantel's smug, arrogant smile vanished instantly. "Run it again!" she snapped, her voice rising in panic and pitch. "The machine is obviously broken. I just used that exact card yesterday. My husband makes millions of dollars. Run it again right now." Margaret, looking visibly uncomfortable, pulled the metal card out and wiped the chip on her sleeve before inserting it a second time. The machine whirred again. Another loud, harsh beep rang out through the store. Margaret looked down at the digital screen and her polite retail smile completely dropped away. "Ma'am, the terminal says this account is frozen due to suspected fraudulent activity," Margaret stated, her voice carrying clearly across the entire sales floor. "It is instructing me to physically confiscate the card and notify the local authorities immediately." Vivica rushed up to the marble counter, her face draining of all color. "That is absolutely impossible," she hissed, grabbing Chantel by the arm. "Preston's financial accounts are flawless. There must be a massive mistake with the bank. Try another card, Chantel. Hurry up, because everyone in here is staring at us." Chantel was physically shaking as she dug frantically through her designer leather wallet, pulling out 2 more premium credit cards. She practically threw them at the boutique manager. But I already knew the outcome. Every single card Preston had ever given her was tied directly to the Josephine Trust. The exact generational trust I had completely locked down and taken control of less than an hour ago. Margaret ran both cards through the reader in rapid succession. The machine beeped twice in a row. Both cards declined. Both accounts flagged for major fraud. The whispers from the other wealthy women in the boutique grew noticeably louder. The elite socialites my mother desperately tried to impress every single day were now pointing their fingers and murmuring about the Wilson family having frozen assets and using fraudulent credit cards. Vivica tried to cover her face with her designer handbag, her entire carefully constructed social standing crumbling right in front of her very eyes. "I will give you exactly 10 seconds to leave my store before I call the Buckhead Police Department," Margaret said, firmly slamming Chantel's invalid cards onto the marble counter. "We do not tolerate stolen credit cards in this establishment. Get out of my store right now." Chantel looked like she was going to be physically sick. Vivica grabbed her daughter by the upper arm, pulling her toward the exit, trying desperately to hide her face from the watching housewives. They practically ran out the heavy glass doors, leaving the emerald dress lying abandoned and crumpled on the checkout counter. I stepped up to the register and picked up the beautiful green gown, smoothing out the silk. I pulled out my new sleek black card, the MasterCard tied directly to my grandmother's untouched billions, and handed it to Margaret. "I will take the dress," I said calmly. Margaret, still flustered and breathing heavily from the scene, took my black card and inserted it into the machine. It chimed instantly with an approval. Margaret's eyes widened to the size of saucers as she saw the available balance pop up on her secure screen. Her entire demeanor changed completely. She handed the heavy card back to me with shaking hands, bowing her head slightly in deep respect. "Thank you so much, Miss Wilson. Is there absolutely anything else I can get for you today?" I looked around the luxury boutique at the 5 other women who had completely stopped their shopping to watch the spectacle unfold. "Actually, yes," I said, my voice carrying perfectly through the quiet room. "I would like to pay for the purchases of every other woman currently shopping in this store. Whatever they want, simply put it on my card. Consider it a personal apology for the unfortunate and embarrassing disturbance my former family members just caused." The women gasped in shock and pure delight, whispering my praises as I took my large shopping bag and walked toward the exit. I had the perfect dress, and now I just needed to make the perfect entrance. Tonight, Preston was hosting a multi-million-dollar charity gala to announce his fake corporate merger, and I was going to burn his entire world to the ground right on stage. The camera swoops down from a high angle high above the grand ballroom of the Josephine atrium. It captures the sheer breathtaking opulence of the charity gala below, before slowly pushing down to eye level just as I step through the towering brass doors. The emerald green silk of my gown catches the light with every step I take, flowing around me like liquid armor. The room is overflowing with Atlanta elite. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos circulate with silver trays of expensive champagne and rare caviar. A live string quartet plays softly in the corner, masking the low hum of wealthy patrons networking and securing their social status. I scan the room and immediately spot the absolute hypocrisy on display. Preston is holding court near the center of the ballroom, surrounded by older, wealthy white men from his father's declining social circle. He is laughing loudly, slapping them on the back, and acting like the ultimate billionaire savior. He is using my family's black generational wealth to fund this entire lavish spectacle, specifically to buy his way back into a society that had completely rejected his bankrupt father. He is parading my family's money around as if he earned it himself, while secretly draining our accounts dry. I take a deep breath and walk toward the grand entrance archway. Two massive private security guards in dark suits step squarely into my path, crossing their arms to physically block me from entering the main ballroom. Before I can even address them, my father marches over from the VIP section. Reginald is practically vibrating with rage. His tuxedo is perfectly tailored, but his face is twisted in an ugly snarl. He stops inches from my face, keeping his voice in a harsh, venomous whisper so the surrounding guests cannot hear him. "You have an incredible amount of nerve showing up here tonight, Zariah," my father hisses, his eyes darting around the room to see if anyone is watching us. "You are a complete disgrace to this family and to the entire Black community. We worked our entire lives to build a respectable reputation in this city, and you show up here trying to act like a common hoodlum. You are embarrassing us in front of the most important investors in the state. Turn around and walk out those doors right now before I have these men physically throw you onto the pavement." I do not step back. I do not lower my gaze. I look right past him to the frantic woman holding a clipboard and a headset. She is the lead event manager for the venue. I raise my hand and signal for her to come over. She scurries over, looking nervously between me and my father. "Mr. Wilson," she stammers softly, "is there a problem at the door?" My father waves a dismissive hand at me. "Yes, there is a massive problem. This woman is an uninvited trespasser. I want her removed from the property immediately. Use force if you have to, but get her out of my sight." The event manager turns to the security guards, but before she can give the order, I reach into my matching emerald clutch. I pull out a single thick piece of cardstock bearing the official raised seal of the state of Georgia. I hand it directly to the event manager. "Do not look at him," I say, my voice ringing with absolute calm authority. "Look at the deed to this property." The event manager frowns and looks down at the paper. Her eyes scan the bold print at the top of the page. She reads the legal transfer of the Josephine Trust and the property deeds associated with it, including the very building we are standing inside. The color completely drains from her face. She looks up at me, her mouth opening and closing in sheer panic. She quickly turns to the two massive security guards who are still blocking my path. "Stand down," she orders them, her voice trembling with sudden fear. "Stand down right now. Step aside and let Miss Wilson through." Reginald looks at the event manager as if she has just lost her mind. "What are you doing?" he demands, his voice rising in panic. "I am the one paying for this venue. I demand you throw her out." The event manager refuses to look at my father. She keeps her eyes respectfully lowered toward me. "Actually, Mr. Wilson, you are not the owner of this venue," she replies, her voice shaking. "Miss Wilson is—" My father freezes, completely paralyzed by the words. He looks at me, and for the first time in my entire life, I see genuine, absolute fear in his eyes. I do not say another word to him. I smoothly bypass the stunned security guards and walk straight into the glittering ballroom. The crowd parts for me, naturally drawn to the confidence radiating from my every step. I walk directly to the front of the room, where the large VIP table is stationed right below the main stage. Vivica and Chantel are already sitting there. They are both pale and sweating, clutching their crystal glasses like life preservers. They had obviously fled the luxury boutique and rushed straight here, too terrified to tell Preston what had happened with the credit cards. I pull out the center chair, the one clearly reserved for the guest of honor, and sit down, crossing my legs. Chantel looks like she is going to pass out, but she does not dare make a scene in front of the cameras. Suddenly, the room lights dim, and a bright spotlight hits the center of the stage. The string quartet stops playing. Preston jogs up the short steps to the stage, tapping the microphone and flashing a brilliant, arrogant smile to the crowd. He has absolutely no idea what has transpired over the last 2 hours. He thinks he is still the king of the world. "Thank you all for coming out tonight," Preston says, his voice booming through the sound system. "We are here to celebrate charity, yes, but we are also here to celebrate the future. Tonight marks the beginning of a massive new legacy. I am thrilled to announce the official multi-million-dollar merger between my family's firm and Wilson Investments." The crowd erupts into polite applause. Preston reaches inside his tailored tuxedo jacket and pulls out a thick stack of legal contracts. He waves them in the air for the audience to see, playing the role of the triumphant businessman perfectly. Two great families coming together to build an unstoppable financial empire. He continues, completely oblivious to the panic radiating from the VIP table. "We are going to finalize this historic deal right here, live on stage in front of all our esteemed friends and colleagues. I would like to invite my esteemed father-in-law, Reginald Wilson, to the stage right now to sign these papers and make our new partnership official." My father stood up from the VIP table, smoothing the lapels of his custom tuxedo. Despite the sheer terror I had seen in his eyes just moments prior, he simply could not resist the intoxicating pull of an audience. He craved the validation of the wealthy white elite more than he cared about the actual survival of his own family. He forced a stiff, tight smile onto his face and began the short walk up the velvet-lined stairs to the main stage. The applause from the ballroom washed over him, and I could see his posture straighten, feeding off the temporary illusion of power and respect. From my seat at the front of the room, I watched over my shoulder as Preston greeted my father on the stage. Preston grasped Reginald by the hand, pulling him into a theatrical, aggressive handshake designed to display dominance. Preston turned to the podium and picked up a heavy gold fountain pen, holding it out to my father with a predatory gleam in his eye. The stage lights reflected off the polished metal of the pen, casting a bright, sharp glare across the dark wood of the podium. Reginald reached out his fingers, trembling slightly, as he prepared to sign away the absolute last remaining fraction of our family legacy. I did not wait for the ink to touch the paper. I stood up from my chair and began walking toward the stage. My movement was fluid and entirely silent, but it immediately drew the attention of the front row. I kept my gaze locked entirely on Preston. As I climbed the velvet steps, the room seemed to stretch and distort around me, the sounds of the string quartet and the polite applause fading into a dull, distant hum. I glided up the stairs, my emerald gown trailing behind me like a shadow. Preston caught sight of me out of the corner of his eye. His fake, charming smile faltered for a fraction of a second before he quickly recovered, gripping the edges of the podium. "Zariah, we are in the middle of a very important corporate presentation," Preston said, leaning into the microphone so his voice echoed across the massive ballroom. "I think you need to return to your seat and let the adults handle the business." I did not stop walking. I did not return to my seat. I stepped directly up to the wooden podium and forcefully grabbed the thick black audio cable connecting the primary microphone to the sound system. With one sharp, aggressive pull, I yanked the cord completely out of the socket. A loud, violent pop of static blasted through the towering ballroom speakers, instantly silencing the room. The polite chatter of the billionaire investors came to a dead halt. The string quartet stopped playing mid-note. The silence that fell over the grand space was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. Preston stared at me, his mouth slightly open in genuine shock. Reginald stood frozen, holding the gold pen hovering just inches above the fraudulent contract. I reached into my emerald clutch and pulled out a small, encrypted silver flash drive. Without breaking eye contact with Preston, I plugged the drive directly into the master presentation laptop, resting on the lower shelf of the podium. I tapped the enter key, overriding the venue's default display settings. The massive floor-to-ceiling LED screens behind the stage flickered wildly. The glowing generic charity logos instantly vanished. In their place, high-definition scans of confidential banking records, offshore wire transfers, and federal tax liens illuminated the entire ballroom in harsh, bright white light. The documents were enormous, impossible to miss, and entirely devastating. I turned away from Preston and faced my father. I did not need a microphone to make my voice heard in the dead quiet room. "Preston is not merging your companies, Dad." I said, my words slicing through the heavy silence with lethal precision. "He is absorbing our family assets to pay off his father's $50 million IRS tax debt." Reginald stared at the towering screens behind me. His eyes darted frantically across the brightly lit financial documents. He saw the shell companies he had blindly authorized wire transfers to. He saw the exact routing numbers matching the bankrupt estate of Preston's disgraced father. He saw the $50 million federal tax lien stamped with the official red seal of the Internal Revenue Service. The reality of his own catastrophic stupidity crashed down on him all at once. The heavy gold fountain pen slipped from his trembling fingers and clattered loudly against the wooden stage floor. He staggered backward, bringing a shaking hand up to his chest, as if he had been physically struck. He had sold out his own blood, his own mother's empire, just to buy a seat at a table filled with people who were actively robbing him blind. A collective gasp echoed across the grand ballroom. The elite old money investors Preston had invited to witness his triumph were now putting down their crystal champagne flutes and pointing at the massive screens. Whispers of fraud and embezzlement began to ripple through the crowd, spreading like wildfire. Vivica let out a muffled sob from the VIP table, burying her face in her hands, as her entire social standing evaporated in real time. Chantel sat completely paralyzed, staring up at the stage with hollow, empty eyes. Preston looked out at the sea of wealthy faces turning against him. He looked at the undeniable proof of his federal crimes glowing brightly behind his head. His chest heaved, and the charming, sophisticated mask he had worn for years finally slipped off completely, exposing the rabid, desperate parasite underneath. His face flushed a dark, violent red. He lunged forward, snatching a backup wireless microphone from the hands of a terrified stagehand. "Shut up!" Preston screamed into the microphone, his voice cracking with pure, unhinged rage. "Shut your mouth, you ungrateful, pathetic liars." He paced across the stage, glaring down at my parents, and then turning his furious, rabid gaze onto me. He gripped the microphone so hard his knuckles turned stark white. He did not care about the cameras anymore. He did not care about the audience. He was cornered, and he was lashing out with the ugliest, deepest parts of his true nature. "You think this money belongs to you?" Preston shouted, his voice echoing violently through the ballroom. "You people were absolutely nothing before I married into this family. You were a joke, a bunch of new money trash trying to play dress-up in a world that never wanted you. I elevated you. I gave you access to polite society. I brought you into the country clubs and the boardrooms that would have locked their doors in your faces. You owe me this money. Every single dime of that black wealth belongs to me, because I am the only reason any of these people even pretend to tolerate your existence." The echo of Preston's disgusting racial slur hung in the cavernous ballroom like a toxic cloud. The utter silence of the elite crowd was deafening. Wealthy investors and old money socialites stared in sheer, absolute revulsion. Preston stood on the stage chest, heaving, gripping the microphone, as he realized he had just destroyed his own carefully curated masquerade. But my eyes were not on him. My focus shifted entirely to my sister. The space around Chantel seemed to violently shrink. If someone were filming this exact moment, the camera would be pressed suffocatingly close to her face, shaking unsteadily to capture her complete psychological collapse. Her chest heaved with rapid, shallow breaths. Her perfectly contoured makeup was already streaking down her cheeks as tears of sheer panic spilled over. Her wide, terrified eyes darted frantically from the massive LED screens displaying Preston's financial crimes to the man himself standing on the stage spewing hatred at our family. Instead of directing her fury at the man who had just admitted to exploiting and despising her, Chantel's twisted, deeply conditioned mind violently snapped in the opposite direction. She locked her eyes on me. A raw, animalistic scream tore from her throat. It was a sound of pure, unhinged desperation. She lunged off the VIP platform, her designer heels slipping on the polished floor. She shoved past two stunned waiters and charged directly at me, her hands curled into claws aiming for my face. "You ruined everything," Chantel shrieked, her voice cracking wildly. "You ruined my marriage, you ruined my life, Zariah." I did not even take a step back. I stood my ground, letting her violently crash into the invisible barrier of my own absolute calm. Miss Holloway stepped forward instantly, intercepting Chantel and grabbing her flailing arms by the wrists. Chantel thrashed against the older woman's iron grip, kicking her feet and sobbing hysterically. "He was going to love me." Chantel sobbed, the delusion pouring out of her in ragged, desperate gasps. "He promised me we would rule this city together. I did everything he asked me to do. I did everything to protect him from you. I was the one who made those calls, Zariah. I did it." The ballroom, which was already paralyzed in shock, somehow grew even quieter. The wealthy patrons nearest to us leaned in, completely captivated by the grotesque implosion of the Wilson family. I kept my voice dangerously low, perfectly even. "What calls, Chantel?" "The calls to your pathetic little job interviews," Chantel screamed, thrashing against Ms. Holloway's grip. Her face was flushed a blotchy dark red. "I was the one who called every single financial firm in Chicago. Preston told me you were getting too close to independence. He said if you got a senior analyst job, you would eventually look into the family accounts and see what he was doing. I had to stop you. I called them and said I was a detective with the Atlanta Police Department. I told them you were under active criminal investigation for corporate fraud. I made them rescind your offers. I did it to keep my husband happy." Her confession hung in the air, pathetic and vile. She had impersonated a law enforcement officer and actively destroyed my career, my sanity, and my livelihood just to appease a white man who had just publicly referred to our family as new money trash. She expected me to scream. She expected me to cry and beg for an explanation. She expected the dynamic we had shared since childhood, where she inflicted pain and I absorbed it. I reached into the inner pocket of my emerald evening gown. I pulled out a neatly folded stack of thick, premium paper. I took one deliberate step forward, closing the distance between us. Ms. Holloway maintained her firm grip on my sister's wrists, forcing Chantel to stand still and face me. I held the documents right in front of Chantel's tear-stained face. I did not yell. I spoke with the cold, calculated precision of an executioner. "I already know, Chantel." Chantel blinked, her chest heaving as she stared blindly at the papers. "These are the certified printed transcripts of every single phone call you made to those firms in Chicago," I explained, watching the color rapidly drain from her flushed cheeks. "When Ms. Holloway and I took control of the Josephine Trust this morning, we also gained access to the family's private telecommunications server, the one Dad installed to monitor employee calls. You used your home office line to make those threats. Every single word was recorded, saved, and backed up to the cloud." Chantel stopped thrashing. Her knees buckled slightly, but Miss Holloway held her upright. I handed the transcripts to my sister, tucking them forcefully against her chest. "I did not just print them for you to read, Chantel. I already handed the original audio files over to the district attorney 3 hours ago." I smiled, a slow, terrifying smile that made her physically recoil. Felony impersonation of a police officer carries a mandatory minimum sentence in the state of Georgia. Extortion and wire fraud will add another decade to your inevitable plea deal. You are going to federal prison. Chantel let out a breathless, whimpering sound. She looked up at the stage, desperately seeking Preston's help. Preston was already backing away toward the emergency exit, completely abandoning her without a second thought. He was trying to slip out the back door, while the crowd was distracted by her meltdown. Vivica scrambled out of her chair at the VIP table, grasping blindly at the tablecloth. "Zariah, you cannot do this to your own flesh and blood," my mother pleaded, her voice trembling with absolute terror. "She is your sister. You are destroying this family." I turned my cold gaze to Vivica. "No, mother," I replied. "You destroyed this family the minute you let a parasite drain my grandmother's legacy while you threw me out onto the street. I am just the one cleaning up the mess." Suddenly, a loud, piercing sound sliced through the heavy tension in the grand ballroom. The distinct wail of police sirens echoed from the busy downtown streets outside. The sound grew rapidly louder, multiplying as multiple squad cars approached Josephine Tower. Red and blue lights began to aggressively flash against the towering glass windows of the atrium, casting harsh, spinning shadows across the wealthy guests. Chantel collapsed onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably as the reality of her impending arrest crashed down upon her. She curled into a tight, pathetic ball, clutching her designer gown. The sirens were deafening now, right outside the main brass doors. But as the heavy doors of the ballroom swung open, revealing a half-dozen uniformed police officers and two sharp-looking federal agents, I looked down at Chantel and shook my head. "Do not flatter yourself, Chantel," I said, my voice barely audible over the blaring sirens. "They are not here for you yet." I looked past my sobbing sister and locked eyes with my father. Reginald was backed into the corner near the stage, his face completely gray, his hands shaking uncontrollably. The federal agents marched directly past me, stepping over the scattered crystal and torn floral arrangements. They did not even look at Chantel. They walked straight up to Reginald Wilson, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from their belts. The grand ballroom immediately descends into pure sensory chaos. The flashing red and blue lights from the armada of police cruisers outside slice violently through the massive floor-to-ceiling glass windows. The strobing colors paint the horrified faces of the Atlanta elite in harsh, aggressive strokes, making the entire room feel as if it is tilted off its axis. Slanted, dizzying shadows stretch across the polished marble floors as uniformed officers swarm the perimeter, systematically locking down every single exit. The wealthy guests scramble backward, bumping into tables and spilling champagne, desperately trying to physically distance themselves from the center of the stage. The two lead federal agents do not hesitate. They march with terrifying tactical precision straight past my sobbing sister and corner my father against the edge of the velvet steps. Reginald Wilson, the man who spent his entire adult life obsessing over his flawless, untouchable public image, suddenly looks like a trapped animal. "Reginald Wilson, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering," the broad-shouldered lead agent announces, his deep voice easily cutting through the rising panic of the crowd. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back right now." Reginald violently recoils. He holds his hands up, his palms facing outward, shaking his head in frantic, rapid denial. "No, no, you do not understand. This is a massive mistake," he stammers, his voice pitching up into a reedy panic. His perfectly tailored tuxedo suddenly looks 2 sizes too big for his shrinking frame. "I am the victim here." He whips his head around, searching the crowd, until his wild, terrified eyes lock onto me. "She did this!" he screams, his voice cracking with pure, unhinged hysteria, as he points a trembling finger right at my face. "My daughter did this. She is a criminal. She hacked into my personal servers and fabricated those financial documents to frame me. She is trying to steal my company." I do not even flinch. I stand perfectly still, letting his desperate, pathetic lies wash over me without a single reaction. The crowd murmurs, shifting their uneasy gaze between the two of us, weighing the accusation. But before the federal agents can even respond to his frantic deflection, a calm, authoritative voice echoes clearly from the main center aisle. "She did not have to hack anything, Reginald." The sea of panicked, wealthy socialites parts instantly. Ms. Holloway walks slowly and deliberately down the center aisle, flanked by a third federal investigator. She carries a stack of thick, worn, leather-bound books pressed tightly against her chest. She stops right beside me, looking up at the man she used to call her employer for over 3 decades. Her face is a mask of pure, absolute disgust. "You left a very clear paper trail all on your own," Ms. Holloway states, her voice ringing with the undeniable weight of truth. She hands the heavy leather books directly over to the lead federal agent. These are Josephine Wilson's original handwritten financial ledgers. When I assumed legal control of the trust this morning, I compared them directly to the current corporate accounts. Reginald did not just falsify wire transfers to impress his new son-in-law. He has been systematically siphoning massive amounts of money for the past 4 years. Reginald's mouth opens, but no sound comes out. The blood drains completely from his face, leaving him looking like a hollow ghost. Mrs. Holloway turns slightly to face the crowd, raising her voice so every single prominent guest in the room can hear the exact depth of his depravity. He did not just steal corporate equity, she announces, her words echoing off the vaulted ceiling. He stole directly from the Josephine Wilson Community Youth Fund. He completely drained the educational scholarships his own mother explicitly established for underprivileged children in this city, just so he could buy his way into a country club that secretly despised him. The collective gasp from the elite crowd is deafening. The very people my father had spent his entire life desperately trying to impress are now looking at him with absolute unmasked revulsion. Stealing from business partners was one thing, but stealing from a charity fund meant for impoverished orphans was a social death sentence. He is instantly a pariah. The men he was drinking with just 10 minutes ago are now looking at him like he is an infection. The lead agent grabs Reginald by the shoulder, forcefully spinning him around and slamming his wrists together behind his back. The sharp metallic click of the heavy steel handcuffs locking into place echoes loudly in the stunned, silent ballroom. "You have the right to remain silent." The agent recites, his voice devoid of any emotion, as he aggressively shoves my father forward. "I highly suggest you start using it." Reginald stumbles his legs, barely supporting his own weight. The flashbulbs of 100 cell phone cameras begin to detonate around the room as the wealthy guests mercilessly document the spectacular fall of Reginald Wilson. He bows his head, trying desperately to hide his face from the blinding flashes, his entire carefully curated legacy permanently reduced to a humiliating perp walk. I watch him being led away, feeling a strange, cold emptiness. The man who had spent his life making me feel small was now nothing more than a pathetic criminal in a tailored suit. I turn my attention back to the wooden podium, ready to retrieve my encrypted flash drive, and finally walk out of this cursed building forever. But out of the corner of my eye, I catch a sudden violent blur of motion. Vivica lets out a guttural, terrifying shriek. She has completely snapped. Watching her husband get hauled away in handcuffs and her social standing evaporate into thin air has utterly shattered her fragile psyche. Her perfect socialite mask disintegrates, leaving behind nothing but pure, unhinged malice. She leaps up from the VIP table, her eyes wide and bloodshot. She lunges across the dining spread, her manicured hands wrapping tightly around the thick neck of a heavy Magnum champagne bottle. "You little bitch!" Vivica screams, her voice tearing fiercely through her throat. She raises the massive glass bottle high above her head, swinging it with deadly lethal force directly toward the presentation laptop, holding all the digital evidence. She is not just trying to smash the computer to destroy the files. She is trying to smash me. I ducked hard to the right just as the heavy green glass of the Magnum bottle came crashing down. The impact shattered the wooden podium into jagged splinters, sending a violent spray of glass and champagne erupting across the stage. The liquid drenched the front row of investors, sending them scrambling backward in absolute terror. I did not waste a single millisecond. I grabbed the master laptop by its base, ripping the power cord from the wall, and sprinted toward the heavy black curtain separating the stage from the backstage corridors. I heard Vivica scream, a raw, guttural sound of pure madness, as her expensive heels slipped on the champagne-soaked stage. She scrambled to her feet and charged right after me. The camera framing this nightmare would be suffocatingly tight, bouncing erratically as we tore through the narrow, dimly lit concrete hallways of the venue. The flashing red and blue lights from the police cruisers outside bled through the high transom windows, casting sharp, disorienting shadows against the cinder block walls. "Get back here," Vivica shrieked, her voice echoing violently off the concrete. "You are not taking everything from me." I pushed my legs as fast as they could move, clutching the metal chassis of the laptop tightly against my chest. I knew exactly where the venue's master server control room was located. It was the absolute nerve center for the LED displays and the digital archives. If Vivica managed to destroy this laptop before the data completely synced with the venue's unbreachable cloud backup, Preston's lawyers could still find a legal loophole to bury the evidence. I reached the heavy steel door marked "Authorized Personnel Only" and threw my entire body weight against the crash bar. I tumbled into the freezing cold server room. Towering black racks of blinking blue and green lights hummed loudly, filling the claustrophobic space with a dense electronic vibration. I scrambled toward the primary terminal station in the center of the room, desperately slamming the laptop down onto the metal desk and jamming the Ethernet bypass cable into the port. Before I could hit the final command to lock the sequence, the heavy steel door violently crashed open. Vivica lunged into the small room. She had lost one of her designer shoes in the chase, and her expensive silk gown was torn at the knee. She looked like a deranged feral animal. She did not hesitate. She lunged directly for the towering server racks, her manicured hands clawing wildly at the thick bundles of fiber optic cables. "I will burn it all down!" Vivica roared, wrapping her fingers around a massive cluster of wires and pulling with all her remaining strength. "I will destroy everything before I let you walk away with it." I abandoned the laptop and tackled my mother from behind. The physical impact knocked the breath out of both of us as we slammed against the metal grating of the server racks. The camera would whip back and forth between our faces, capturing the sheer desperate violence of a mother and daughter locked in a brutal physical brawl. Vivica thrashed wildly, throwing her elbows back and trying to claw at my face. I wrapped my arms securely around her torso, pinning her wrists tightly against her chest and driving her back against the cold steel panels. "Stop it!" I yelled, my voice echoing over the loud hum of the industrial cooling fans. "It is over, Mom. The FBI is literally upstairs putting Dad in handcuffs. The money is gone." Vivica kicked backward, her bare heels striking my shin, but I refused to let go. I tightened my grip, feeling her ribs heaving as she hyperventilated. Her struggle slowly morphed from physical violence into a complete psychological collapse. She stopped fighting my grip and simply sagged against the metal grating, letting out a ragged, agonizing sob. "I hate you," Vivica screamed, her voice cracking as tears ruined her perfectly contoured face. "I have always hated you, Zariah. Ever since you were a little girl looking at me with those judgmental eyes." I kept her pinned, my breathing heavy, but my heart completely cold. "Why?" I demanded, forcing her to say it out loud. "Why did you hate your own child?" "Because you are exactly like her." Vivica spat, the venom pouring out of her in toxic waves. "You are exactly like Josephine. You walk around with that same arrogant, unbreakable spine." She made me feel like I was nothing. She built that entire massive empire from the dirt, and she never let me forget that I was just the pretty face Reginald married. I just wanted to be a wife. I just wanted the country clubs and the cars and the respect of polite society. I did not want to be a warrior. I did not want to fight for every single inch of ground. Vivica sobbed, struggling weakly against my hold. "But you had to be just like her. You had to be the smart one, the fierce self-made black woman who did not need a man to validate her existence. Every time I looked at you, I saw Josephine judging me. I saw my own weakness staring back at me. You were a constant walking reminder that I was nothing but a submissive trophy wife holding on to a man who was quietly stealing his own mother's legacy. I hated you for having the strength that I completely lacked." Her confession hung in the freezing air of the server room, raw and pathetic. She had actively aided in the destruction of her own daughter's life simply because my existence highlighted her own deliberate mediocrity. She had traded her soul for a seat at a table that was now actively collapsing underneath her. I slowly released my grip on her wrists and stepped back. Vivica slid down the metal grating, crumbling onto the cold linoleum floor in a defeated, sobbing heap. I did not offer her a hand. I did not offer her comfort. I simply turned my back on her and walked back to the central terminal. I hit the final enter key on the laptop. The screen flashed a brilliant green, indicating the data transfer was completely secured and locked behind military-grade encryption. The FBI now had permanent, unalterable access to every single fraudulent transaction Reginald and Preston had ever executed. But as the progress bar vanished, a secondary window suddenly popped up on the master terminal screen. It was an automated trigger embedded deep within the Josephine Trust's archived security protocols. A hidden encrypted file began to auto-decrypt right in front of my eyes. I leaned closer, the harsh blue light of the monitor reflecting off my face. The document was a master ledger, but it was not tied to Reginald or Preston. The name at the top of the offshore account was Richard, Preston's supposedly bankrupt father. I scrolled down, watching the staggering numbers align. Preston had not just been stealing our money to pay off his father's IRS debt. Richard had actively set up a secondary shadow account in the Cayman Islands. He had been quietly skimming millions off the top of the embezzled funds, laundering the Josephine wealth to secretly rebuild his own personal empire while letting his son take all the legal risks. The chaotic spinning lights of the police raid faded into the crisp, unforgiving sunlight of the following morning. The digital evidence I secured from the server room had triggered a massive federal sweep, but the true architect of the fraud was still sitting comfortably in his fortress. If a camera were filming this exact moment, it would execute a slow, deliberate push-in on a dark mahogany-lined office, moving with the steady, terrifying patience of a predator stalking its prey. The air inside the room was heavy, thick with the scent of aged leather and expensive cigars. Richard Sterling sat behind a desk carved from a massive single slab of imported walnut. He wore a pristine navy suit, his silver hair perfectly styled, looking every inch the powerful, wealthy white politician who had spent decades shaping the city to his will. He did not look up when I walked through his double doors. It was a classic, calculated power play designed to make me feel small. He slowly turned the page of the Financial Times, deliberately letting the silence stretch. I did not fidget. I did not speak. I simply stood in the center of the plush Persian rug and waited, letting my absolute stillness fill the cavernous room. Finally, Richard folded his newspaper and set it aside. He looked at me with a gaze so entirely devoid of respect, it bordered on amusement. He saw me as a temporary nuisance, a minor inconvenience that his vast wealth and political connections could easily erase before his morning golf game. "You put on quite a show last night, Zariah," he began, his voice a deep, gravelly baritone that commanded boardrooms and terrified local officials. "I will admit I underestimated your flair for the dramatic. Sending the FBI to raid your own family gala was a bold move." I kept my expression completely blank. "I am not here to discuss my methods, Richard." He chuckled, a low, patronizing sound. "No, you are here because you think you have won. You think because you put your foolish father in handcuffs and sent my son running scared that you actually hold some kind of power in this city?" He opened a brass humidor on his desk, selecting a cigar with agonizing slowness. "But the adults are talking now, Zariah." Richard reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a crisp, premium leather checkbook. He uncapped a heavy gold fountain pen and began to write. The scratching of the nib against the thick paper was the only sound in the massive office. He tore the check loose and placed it face up on the polished wood. With one manicured finger, he slowly, deliberately slid the piece of paper across the vast expanse of the desk until it stopped right at the edge, directly in front of me. I glanced down. It was a certified cashier's check made out to me for $10 million. "You are a smart girl," Richard said, leaning back in his leather chair and steepling his fingers. "You figured out the embezzlement. You exposed the shell companies. But you need to understand how the real world works. My son Preston is reckless, but he is still my blood. I am not going to let a newly minted heiress ruin his political future or my legacy over a few misplaced charity funds." He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the desk, his facade of polite amusement dropping instantly to reveal the ruthless predator beneath. His eyes turned hard and cold. "Take the money, drop the charges against my son, and go back to the ghetto where you belong. You cannot fight the system I built." His racist, condescending words hung in the air, designed to humiliate and intimidate me into submission. He expected me to snatch the check. He expected me to take the generational wealth he was casually tossing my way and disappear quietly into the background, just like everyone else he had bought off over the last 30 years. I looked at the $10 million check. Then I looked back at Richard. I raised my hand and placed a single finger on the edge of the premium paper. Slowly, deliberately, I pushed the check back across the mahogany desk until it rested exactly where it had started. "I do not need your money, Richard," I stated, my voice dropping to a deadly, icy calm. "Because I just bought your primary lender." If you do not surrender your son to the authorities by noon, I am foreclosing on your entire estate." Richard stared at me for 3 agonizing seconds before a sharp barking laugh erupted from his chest. "You are bluffing," he scoffed, shaking his head as if dismissing a ridiculous joke. "You do not have the capital to buy a bank, Zariah. You are playing entirely out of your league. You think finding that offshore shadow ledger on the server gives you leverage. Digital files can be manipulated. No bank is going to call in my loans based on the accusations of a bitter ex-fiancé. I own this city." He aggressively snatched the heavy black receiver of his desk phone. "I will show you exactly how much power you really have," he spat, punching in a private speed dial number with furious, jerky movements. "I am going to call my private wealth manager at Vanguard Horizon right now and have your assets frozen permanently." I stood perfectly still, watching him press the phone to his ear with a triumphant sneer. The room was deathly quiet as he waited for the connection. "Vanguard Horizon Executive Office," Richard barked into the receiver the moment the line clicked open. "This is Richard Sterling. I need to speak with the Managing Director of Acquisitions immediately." The voice that echoed out of the earpiece was crisp, professional, and entirely familiar. It carried clearly across the quiet office, completely shattering Richard's reality. "This is the Managing Director's office, Richard," the voice replied with chilling, polite precision. "Ms. Zariah Wilson finalized the absolute acquisition of this branch at 8 o'clock this morning. I am Miss Holloway, the new Executive Vice President. How may we direct your foreclosure today?" The heavy black phone slipped from Richard's trembling fingers, crashing onto the polished mahogany desk. The camera glides with a smooth, unsettling fluidity, moving like a silent shadow through the darkened corridors of the newly acquired Josephine Trust penthouse headquarters. It tracks Chantel from behind, maintaining a strict, voyeuristic distance, peering around frosted glass partitions and heavy oak doorways. My sister moves with a frantic, jerky paranoia. Her usually flawless blonde hair is matted with nervous sweat, and her hands tremble violently as she grips the handle of my private office door. The security system was supposed to be locked down, but Chantel still had the master override codes Reginald had given her months ago. She pushes the heavy mahogany door open, slipping into the cavernous room bathed only in the pale ambient light of the city skyline pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Chantel does not waste a single second. She drops her designer bag onto the floor and immediately scrambles behind my massive glass desk. Her manicured fingers tear through the top drawers, tossing neatly organized files and premium stationery onto the floor in a desperate frenzy. She is hunting for the physical backup drive, the master ledger containing the final unredacted proof of Richard Sterling's offshore money laundering empire. She yanks open the bottom drawer and lets out a breathless, jagged gasp of triumph. Her fingers close around the heavy silver encrypted drive. "You always were entirely too predictable, Chantel." The sudden sound of my voice slicing through the dark office makes her scream. The overhead recessed lighting snaps on with a blinding, harsh brilliance. I am sitting perfectly still in the high-backed leather armchair in the far corner of the room, my legs crossed, holding a single manila folder in my lap. I had been waiting for her for over an hour. Chantel spins around, clutching the silver drive to her chest, as if it were a life preserver. She looks absolutely deranged. Her eyes are bloodshot and wild, darting toward the exit like a trapped rat. "Put the drive back on the desk, Chantel." I instruct, my tone devoid of any anger or heat. It is a completely useless piece of hardware. I already transmitted the contents to the federal prosecutor 10 minutes after Richard tried to bribe me. "You are stealing a dead piece of metal." She shakes her head violently, backing away until her spine hits the glass window. "No, you are lying!" She hyperventilates, gripping the drive so hard, her knuckles turn stark white. "Richard said if I brought him the physical drive, he could use his technicians to wipe the digital footprint. He promised me Zariah. He looked me in the eyes and promised that if I fixed this mess, Preston would come back to me. Preston just needs time to cool off. He is just scared of the FBI. If I give this to his father, everything goes back to normal." I look at my sister, feeling a profound, chilling wave of pity wash over me. She is completely untethered from reality, actively offering herself up as a sacrificial pawn for a family of wealthy white men who view her as nothing more than disposable collateral damage. Preston is not coming back, I state firmly, leaning forward in the leather chair. He abandoned you at the gala while you were literally screaming his name on the floor. He used your father to steal our grandmother's money, and he used you to cover his tracks. You are a liability to him now. You do not understand! Chantel shrieks, her voice shattering into a hysterical, high-pitched wail. She drops to her knees, the sharp impact echoing off the polished hardwood floor. She crawls forward, dragging her expensive dress across the scattered files until she is grasping desperately at the edge of my chair. I have to fix this, Zariah. I have to make him come back. I am pregnant. The room goes dead silent. Chantel stares up at me, tears streaming down her ruined face, her chest heaving with desperate, ragged breaths. I am carrying his child, she sobs, her voice dropping to a pathetic, begging whisper. We were going to start a family. He promised me we would build a dynasty together. You cannot take the father of my baby away from me. Please, Zariah, give me the real files. Let me save my marriage. I look down at her tear-stained face, the desperation radiating off her in pathetic waves. I do not shout. I do not mock her. I simply open the manila folder resting on my lap. When Ms. Holloway and I seized the Josephine Trust servers yesterday morning, I explain, my voice dropping to a surgical, icy calm. We gained access to everything Reginald and Preston had hidden behind the corporate firewall. That included Preston's personal encrypted cloud storage, the one he used to hide his communications with his father. But he also used it to hide his private medical records away from the family insurance plans so you would never accidentally see them. Chantel stops crying. Her breath catches in her throat as a look of sheer, unadulterated confusion washes over her features. I pull a single sheet of premium medical stationery from the folder and hold it out directly in front of her face. I read the clinical text slowly, ensuring every single word registers in her delusional mind. This is a certified surgical report from an exclusive private clinic in Switzerland, I state, watching the remaining color drain entirely from her face. Dated exactly 3 years ago, 6 months before Preston even proposed to you. It details a highly successful, irreversible vasectomy. Preston was completely, permanently sterilized, Chantel. She stares blindly at the medical document, her lips parting, but no sound coming out. So I continue, my voice cutting through her shattered reality like a scalpel. You are either lying to me right now to try and manipulate my sympathy, or you are actually pregnant by someone else and desperately hoping Preston will be stupid enough to claim it. But let me make this painfully clear to you. Preston knew you could never trap him. He gaslit you for years about starting a family, stringing you along with fake promises of a dynasty, while knowing with absolute medical certainty that he would never give you a child. He locked you in a cage of false hope just to ensure you remained utterly loyal to his father's theft. The silver drive slips from Chantel's fingers, clattering uselessly onto the hardwood floor. She collapses backward, her hands flying up to cover her mouth as a silent, agonizing scream tears through her body. The full, devastating weight of Preston's absolute psychological manipulation crashes down upon her. She had betrayed her own blood, her own sister, and her own grandmother for a man who had fundamentally engineered her entire life as a calculated, disposable lie. Suddenly, the heavy silence in the office is shattered by a harsh, aggressive vibration. Chantel's cell phone lights up where she had dropped her designer bag on the floor. The screen glows brightly in the dim room, flashing Preston's name in bold black letters. Chantel scrambles toward it blindly, her hands shaking so violently she can barely swipe the screen to answer. She hits the speaker button, her breath catching in her throat as she prepares to beg the man who just destroyed her. Preston, please, she gasps, her voice cracking with pure desperation. The voice that comes through the speaker is not apologetic. It is not frightened. It is the cold, clinical voice of a high-priced corporate attorney. Chantel Wilson, the lawyer, states crisply, the sound echoing off the glass walls of my office. I am calling on behalf of Preston Sterling. You are hereby formally served with immediate notice of divorce. Furthermore, as the property you currently reside in was purchased solely under the Sterling Family Trust, You have exactly 2 hours to vacate the premises before private security removes your belongings to the street. Do not attempt to contact my client again." The line goes dead with a sharp, definitive click. The dead dial tone echoed from the dropped phone. The sound was small and sharp against the vast silence of the room. If a camera were capturing this moment, it would pull back into a rigid, static wide shot, isolating the two of us within the massive, empty penthouse. The stillness of the frame would amplify the absolute emotional devastation unfolding on the floor. The sleek, minimalist furniture and the sweeping panoramic views of the Atlanta skyline only made Chantel look smaller. She was a broken, insignificant speck, kneeling on the polished hardwood, clutching her chest as her entire universe evaporated into thin air. She stared at the blank screen of her phone for a long, agonizing minute. The reality of Preston's clinical, brutal abandonment was finally penetrating her conditioned delusions. She had no husband, she had no baby, she had no mansion, and no future in polite society. She was completely untethered. Slowly her head turned, and her bloodshot eyes locked onto me. The manic entitlement that had defined her entire existence was entirely gone. In its place was nothing but raw animalistic panic. "Zaria, please," she whimpered. Her voice was a broken, raspy croak. She dragged herself forward on her knees, disregarding the sharp files and scattered pens digging into her bare skin. She reached out her hands, trembling violently. "You have to help me, Zaria. I have absolutely nowhere to go. My credit cards are tied to the Sterling accounts. They will decline everything. I do not have a single dollar to my name." I sat perfectly still in my leather chair, looking down at the woman who had tormented me since childhood. I did not feel a single ounce of triumph or joy. I just felt a profound clinical emptiness. "Please," Chantel begged, her tears leaving dark, streaky tracks down her cheeks. "We are sisters. We are blood, Zaria. You have billions of dollars now. You own everything. You can give me a job. You can set me up in a hotel or buy me a small condo. Just a place to sleep tonight. I will do whatever you want. I will apologize to you every single day for the rest of my life. Just do not leave me out on the street." Her hands grasped blindly at the hem of my skirt. I stood up smoothly, breaking her physical hold. She fell forward, catching herself on her palms, gasping for air as the cold realization of my silence washed over her. I walked slowly around the edge of my massive glass desk, putting a physical barrier between us. "Blood does not mean loyalty." "Chantel," I stated, my voice perfectly, even completely devoid of sympathy. "You taught me that lesson very well." "I am sorry," she sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "I was wrong. I was so wrong about everything." I looked down at her pathetic form. I remember a winter night 4 years ago. I began the memory sharp and vivid in my mind. Mother and father had thrown me out. I was sleeping in that rusted second-hand sedan behind a strip mall. The engine would not turn over and the heater was dead. The temperature dropped below freezing. I was shivering so violently I thought my ribs would snap. I saw you walking out of a high-end boutique downtown, carrying bags of designer clothes that cost more than a year of my rent. Chantel squeezed her eyes shut, crying harder. I walked up to you, shivering in a thin jacket. I continued, refusing to let her look away from the truth. I swallowed every ounce of my pride. I begged you for a loan. I asked you for just enough money to buy a cheap space heater or a hot meal. Do you remember what you did, Chantel? "Please, Zaria, do not do this," she wailed, pressing her forehead against the cold floor. "You laughed," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register. "You looked at your friends, and you laughed at my misery. You thought my suffering was a hilarious spectacle. You told me I was a disgrace to the Wilson name." I walked back around the desk and stood directly over her. "You helped them ruin my life," I said, delivering the words with surgical precision. "You laughed while I slept in a freezing car. I will not save you from the bed you made." Chantel let out a guttural sound of pure despair. She slapped her hands against the floor, hyperventilating as the finality of my words crushed her. I reached into the pocket of my blazer and pulled out a single crisp piece of paper currency. I let it flutter down through the air until it landed softly on the hardwood floor, right next to her trembling hands. Chantel stared down at the green bill through her tears. It was a $20 bill. "That is exactly what you threw at my feet in the snow that night," I explained, watching her stare at the money in sheer horror. "You threw a 20 at me and told me to buy a cheap blanket and stop embarrassing the family. Consider your debt officially repaid. Take it and get out of my building." I reached over to my desk console and pressed the red intercom button. "Security, I need an immediate escort to the executive penthouse. I have a trespasser who needs to be removed from the premises." Chantel scrambled to her feet, her designer dress hanging in tatters. "No, no, you cannot do this!" "Zariah," she shrieked, her voice echoing frantically against the glass walls. "You are a monster. You are worse than all of them." The heavy mahogany double doors swung open instantly. Two massive security guards in dark suits stepped into the office. I pointed silently at my sister. The guards moved with swift professional efficiency, grabbing Chantel firmly by both arms. "Let go of me!" she screamed, thrashing wildly against their grip. Her heels slipped on the polished floor as she kicked and fought, losing the last remaining shreds of her dignity. "Zariah, please, I am sorry, do not throw me out." The guards dragged her backward effortlessly, pulling her toward the exit. Her screams morphed into a chaotic mix of vicious curses and desperate apologies echoing loudly down the corridor. I watched without blinking as they pulled her through the doorway. The heavy doors clicked shut behind them, instantly cutting off her hysterical wails. The vast penthouse office returned to a state of absolute perfect silence. I stood alone in the center of the room, looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling city skyline that I now controlled. The toxic cycle of the Wilson family was finally broken. I took a deep cleansing breath, letting the quiet stillness wash over me. Then the secure private line on my desk began to ring. The harsh buzzing sound was jarring in the quiet room. I walked slowly over to the console and pressed the flashing speaker button. A cold, automated voice filled the empty office. "You have a collect call from an inmate at the Fulton County Jail," the automated operator announced. "To accept charges, press 1. The recorded name of the inmate played back in a raspy, defeated tone. "It is Reginald Wilson." The camera would instantly cut to a stark tracking shot, moving with mechanical precision through the bleak, sterile concrete corridors of the Fulton County Jail. The harsh fluorescent lighting cast a sickly greenish pallor over the peeling paint and scuffed linoleum floors. The air smelled sharply of industrial bleach and stagnant despair. The camera maintains a tight, low angle, perfectly framing me as I walk. The perspective makes me look towering, absolute, and unstoppable force, cutting through an environment designed entirely to break the human spirit. I wore a pristine, tailored ivory suit that stood in violent contrast to the misery surrounding me. My heels clicked against the floor with a steady, rhythmic finality. The heavy steel door to the visitation block buzzed loudly, sliding open with a metallic clatter. I walked into the cramped visitation room and took my seat in the hard plastic chair. A thick panel of smudged plexiglass separated the room, dividing my reality from his. A moment later, the door on the opposite side opened. Reginald shuffled into the booth. The sight of him was jarring. The man who had spent his entire life demanding absolute subservience, wrapped in bespoke Italian wool and gold cufflinks, was now swimming in an oversized, faded Orange County jumpsuit. His posture was completely broken. The arrogant, unbreakable spine he used to lord over Chantel, our mother, and me had collapsed. He looked 10 years older, his face drawn and exhausted. He sat heavily in the chair and picked up the black plastic receiver. I picked up mine, mirroring his movement, but absolutely nothing else. I sat with my spine perfectly straight, my expression an unreadable mask of calm. "Zariah," my father began, his voice rough, cracking with a desperate manufactured warmth. "Thank God you came. I knew you would not leave your father in a place like this." I just stared at him. My silence was a wall he did not know how to climb. He shifted uncomfortably under my gaze, gripping the receiver tightly with both hands. "Listen to me, Zariah. He leaned closer to the scratched glass, lowering his voice into a conspiratorial whisper, as if the federal agents listening to the recorded line would somehow miss it. This has all gone entirely too far. I understand you were angry about the business restructuring, but involving the federal authorities is a fatal mistake. You know how this country works. We are Black Zariah. The system is rigged against us. The moment they get a black man in a cage, they do everything in their power to throw away the key. You cannot leave your own father in here to rot. We have to stick together, family over everything. That is what your grandmother Josephine always taught us. He was actually using her name. He was invoking the very woman whose legacy he had systematically dismantled and stolen to manipulate me into saving his skin. I let a short, cold laugh escape my lips. The sound was harsh and metallic through the cheap phone speaker. You did not care about being a black man in America when you handed over the keys to Josephine's empire, I said, my voice dropping to a low, venomous whisper. You did not care about the system when you let Richard Sterling, a racist white man who actively despises everything our family stands for, quietly siphon away our generational wealth. You let him launder our money through offshore accounts just so you could play golf at his restricted country club. You sold your soul and your mother's life work for a seat at a table that was actively designed to keep you out. Reginald's eyes widened in genuine shock. He had no idea I had uncovered the full extent of his arrangement with Richard and Preston. You threw Chantel to a man who despised her, I continued, relentlessly pressing the attack. You let my mother rot in her own insecurities. You weaponized the very system you are complaining about against your own daughter to keep me out of the boardroom. You did not care about family over everything when you allowed Chantel to throw $20 at my feet while I slept in a freezing car. You did not care about black excellence when you tried to leave me homeless and penniless to protect your own fragile ego. So do not sit behind that glass and dare to lecture me about systemic oppression when you were the one actively holding the whip. He slammed his fist against the narrow counter under the glass. I am still your father, he snarled, the manipulative facade completely vanishing, replaced by the familiar toxic rage I had grown up with. I demand that you post my bail. You have the funds now. You contact the lawyers and you get me out of here today. I slowly placed the black receiver flat on the counter. I leaned forward so my face was merely inches from the plexiglass, speaking loudly enough that my voice penetrated the plastic barrier without the aid of the phone. I am not paying a single dime of your bail, Reginald. You belong exactly where you are. You traded a mansion for a cage because you were too arrogant to realize you were the pawn. Enjoy the orange. It suits you. I stood up, smoothing the front of my ivory jacket, preparing to walk away. Reginald shot to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the concrete floor. He grabbed the receiver, pressing it to the glass and screaming so loudly the sound bled clearly through the thick partition. You think you have won? He roared, his face turning an angry, mottled purple. You think because you seized the servers and locked me up that you own the Josephine Trust. You are just as stupid as your mother. I paused, glancing back over my shoulder. Reginald was panting, a manic, desperate grin twisting his features. He slammed his hand against the glass, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. You haven't won anything, Zariah. He spat out the words with malicious glee. You did not read the original founding charter closely enough. Grandma Josephine's will has a hidden fail-safe clause. It was designed to prevent a hostile takeover. If the active head of the trust does not host the final mandatory family dinner with all surviving heirs present under one roof, the entire trust instantly dissolves. Every single asset, every dollar, every property liquidates and goes directly to charity. He laughed, a harsh, guttural sound of pure spite. You have to break bread with me and Chantel and your mother. You have to bring us all back to the table, or you lose it all. And the anniversary of Josephine's death is tomorrow. I pressed the button to accept the charge. I did not speak. I only listened to his heavy breathing for 3 seconds before his voice exploded through the speakerphone, raw and unhinged. You think you have won, Zariah? He roared over the harsh static of the county jail line. You think because you locked me up that you own the Josephine Trust. You did not read the original founding charter closely enough. Grandma Josephine's will has a hidden fail-safe clause designed to prevent a hostile takeover. If the active head of the trust does not host the final mandatory family dinner with all surviving heirs present under one roof, the entire trust instantly dissolves. Every single asset liquidates and goes directly to charity. You have to break bread with me, Chantel, and your mother. You have to bring us all back to the table, or you lose it all. And the anniversary of Josephine's death is tomorrow. I slammed my hand down on the console, severing the connection. The harsh red light of the disconnected call blinked in the silent office. I did not waste a single second. I hit the intercom button. Ms. Holloway, bring me the physical archives of the original Josephine Trust Charter immediately. Bring everything. The scene instantly shifts into a fast-paced kinetic montage. A heavy cardboard banker box crashes onto the glass surface of my desk, sending a cloud of ancient dust into the pristine air of the penthouse. Ms. Holloway and I stand on opposite sides, tearing through decades of dense legal paperwork. The camera cuts rapidly between us, moving with frantic, aggressive energy. It executes sharp, sudden crash zooms onto thick stacks of parchment, highlighting specific lines of dense, archaic legalese. We are hunting for the exact provision Reginald threatened me with. The camera whips back and forth from Ms. Holloway's focused, intense expression to my hands frantically flipping through a heavy leather-bound ledger. Loose papers fly across the desk. The rhythmic thud of a heavy rubber stamp and the rapid, aggressive turning of pages serve as the percussive soundtrack to our desperate search. We are racing against a clock that is already ticking down to zero. There, Ms. Holloway states, her voice cutting through the chaotic silence of the room. She slams a heavy yellowed document flat on the glass desk. Article 4, Section 12. The camera executes one final brutal crash zoom, focusing directly on the faded typewritten text of the original will. Reginald was not lying. It was Grandma Josephine's ultimate test of strength. She had built a massive financial empire from the absolute dirt, and she knew exactly how ruthless and deceitful our family could be. She dictated that the sole inheriting heir must host the entire surviving family for a formal dinner at the ancestral mansion on the exact anniversary of her passing to officially seal the transfer of the empire. She wanted to ensure that whoever held the keys to the kingdom was strong enough to sit in a room full of vipers and command their absolute, unwavering respect. If I failed to gather them in that specific house by tomorrow night, the entire multi-billion-dollar empire would vanish. We have a massive problem, Zariah. Ms. Holloway says, her fingers flying across her tablet screen as she cross-references the property deed with the federal database. The ancestral mansion is currently completely locked down by the bank. Reginald secretly leveraged the property against a series of high-risk commercial loans 3 years ago to cover his tracks. When the FBI raided the gala and froze his primary accounts, the bank immediately moved to secure their collateral. The estate is under a strict federal padlock due to unpaid debts. It is an active crime scene and a foreclosed property all at once. I stare out the floor-to-ceiling windows, my mind calculating a dozen different angles simultaneously. I have less than 24 hours to legally clear an impossible mountain of red tape, unlock a sealed mansion, and force my treacherous family to willingly walk through the front doors. Get my legal team on the line right now, I command, turning back to Ms. Holloway, my voice hard and absolute. I own Vanguard Horizon. I bought out Richard Sterling's primary lender this morning. That means I effectively own the debt on the ancestral mansion. I want a judicial override filed in the next hour. Call the federal prosecutor and tell him I will personally guarantee Reginald's assets for seizure, but I need a 24-hour release on that specific property. Use every single ounce of leverage we secured from the server room. Threaten to withhold the decryption keys for Richard's offshore shadow accounts if they do not grant me temporary access to the house. I do not care who you have to threaten or who you have to buy. Get those doors unlocked. Ms. Holloway nods, a sharp, predatory smile crossing her face as she types out the orders. And the family, she asks without looking up. Reginald is currently sitting in a holding cell facing 50 counts of federal fraud. Post his bail? I reply, feeling a cold, dark resolve settle deep into my chest. The words taste like ash, but they are necessary. Pay whatever the judge demands. I want him released on a temporary ankle monitor. He thinks he can use this dinner to force his way back into power. He thinks he has found a loophole to manipulate me. Let him believe it. I want him sitting at the head of that table thinking he has won right up until the exact moment I crush him completely. And Chantel, Ms. Holloway asks, "Send a car to pick her up from whatever gutter she is currently sitting in," I instruct. She has absolutely no money and nowhere to go. Preston threw her to the wolves. Tell her there will be a hot meal and a roof over her head for exactly one night. She will come crawling back to the table. She has absolutely no other choice but to submit. That only left one person. The architect of my deepest childhood trauma. The woman who had actively traded her own daughter for a comfortable seat in a crumbling mansion and the illusion of high society respect. I picked up my cell phone and dialed Vivica's private number. She answered on the second ring, her tone dripping with toxic defensive arrogance. "I heard you put your father in a cage." "Zariah," she sneered, the sound of a cocktail glass clinking in the background. "I suppose you are calling to gloat about destroying this family." "I am calling to invite you to dinner, Mom," I say, my voice perfectly flat, betraying zero emotion. "Tomorrow night at the ancestral mansion, 8 o'clock sharp. You know the terms of Josephine's will just as well as Reginald does. If you are not in your seat, the entire trust dissolves, and you lose your monthly stipend forever." Vivica lets out a sharp, bitter laugh that echoes through the phone. "You really think you can just summon me like one of your corporate employees?" she mocks. "You think you can destroy my marriage, ruin my social standing, expose us all to the FBI, and then demand my presence so you can secure your precious billions? I know exactly how much power I hold right now, Zariah. You need me at that table to get your money. You cannot do this without me." I close my eyes, fighting the sudden, violent urge to shatter the phone against the glass desk. "What do you want, Vivica?" I ask, knowing exactly what kind of monster I am dealing with. Her response is immediate, calculated, and dripping with pure, unadulterated greed. "I am not stepping one single foot inside that drafty old house unless you transfer $1 million into my private offshore account by noon tomorrow. Cash, Zariah. Untraceable and non-refundable. You want your grand empire. You are going to have to buy your mother's attendance." I did not even bother dignifying her extortion with a verbal response. I simply tapped the red icon on my screen, severing the connection and cutting off her arrogant breathing. The sheer audacity of a woman demanding $1 million appearance fee while actively drowning in her husband's sinking ship was staggering. If the camera were to capture this exact moment of realization, it would cut to a smooth, calculating, orbiting shot. It would circle me slowly as I stepped out onto the expansive glass balcony of the penthouse. The cold night air whipped around me, the glittering lights of the Atlanta skyline reflecting sharply in my eyes. I was no longer the scared girl sleeping in a freezing car, begging for scraps of affection from a family that despised me. I was the architect of their reckoning. I raised my phone, switching it to video mode, and created a new group message containing the only 3 numbers that mattered right now: Vivica, Chantel, and the newly bailed-out Reginald. I hit record, keeping my face perfectly composed, bathed in the harsh white glow of the screen. "There seems to be a fundamental misunderstanding about the current balance of power," I stated, my voice echoing off the glass and steel of the balcony, cutting through the ambient city noise. "None of you are in a position to negotiate, make demands, or issue threats. Vivica, you will not receive a single dollar from me. Chantel, you are entirely homeless and destitute. Reginald, you are currently wearing a federal tracking monitor and facing 50 counts of corporate fraud. If you do not show up to the ancestral mansion tomorrow night at exactly 7 o'clock, I will not just let the trust dissolve. I will personally release the unredacted, completely decoded master ledger of your embezzlement directly to the national press, the IRS, and the federal prosecutor's office. You will not just be broke. You will be public enemies, entirely unemployable, and hunted by the very system you thought you controlled. Dress nicely." I sent the video, watched the progress bar complete, and locked my phone. I felt the absolute finality of the trap snapping shut. They had no moves left. They had to walk into the lion's den. By noon the next day, Ms. Holloway's ruthless legal maneuvering had paid off in spectacular fashion. Utilizing our leverage over Richard Sterling's compromised bank, we secured a temporary 24-hour injunction. The federal padlocks were removed from the heavy wrought iron gates of the Josephine Trust estate. I drove up the winding, oak-lined driveway alone. The ancestral mansion loomed ahead, a towering testament to my grandmother's unbreakable spine. It was a massive structure of imported stone and dark wood built by a black woman who had pulled herself up from the absolute dirt of poverty to command a financial empire. Walking through the heavy front doors, the silence of the empty house felt heavy with history and impending justice. I did not hire a luxury catering service. I did not call the Michelin-starred private chefs that Reginald and Vivica had grown accustomed to utilizing for their pretentious social gatherings. This final dinner was not a celebration of wealth. It was an execution of their egos. It required a meal that demanded absolute humility. I walked into the massive industrial kitchen, shedding my designer blazer and rolling up the sleeves of my silk blouse. I opened the commercial pantry and ignored the imported truffles, aged wines, and delicate pastas left behind. Instead, I pulled out heavy cast-iron skillets and deep stock pots. I was going to serve them the exact meal Grandma Josephine used to make when she was working 3 domestic jobs just to keep the heat on. A meal she explicitly served to Reginald once a year, to remind him of exactly where they came from, a tradition he had furiously abandoned the moment she died. I spent the afternoon soaking black-eyed peas, chopping raw onions, celery, and bell peppers, and rendering down smoked turkey in the heavy cast-iron pot. The rich, earthy working-class aroma of simmering beans, heavily spiced rice, and simple buttermilk cornbread filled the pristine, sterile air of the mansion. It was the scent of survival. It was a visceral, sensory reminder of the grit, sweat, and struggle that they had so eagerly traded away for country club memberships and offshore accounts. I arranged the massive mahogany dining table myself. I set 4 places. I used no crystal goblets, no silver chargers, and no floral centerpieces. Just simple, heavy ceramic plates and basic flatware. At 6:55, the heavy security gates at the end of the driveway hummed open. I stood hidden in the shadows by the grand arched window in the front parlor watching them arrive. There was no fleet of tinted black SUVs. There was no chauffeur-driven Bentley or luxury imported sedan. A standard, slightly dented gray Uber pulled up to the front steps of the mansion. The visual was stunning in its absolute pathetic reality. Reginald stepped out first, looking suffocated and diminished in a suit that suddenly seemed too large for his shrinking frame, a bulky black ankle monitor clearly visible above his polished dress shoe. Vivica emerged next, her face pinched in a tight, furious scowl, carrying a cheap generic tote bag instead of her usual seized designer accessories. Chantel trailed behind them, looking completely hollowed out, her eyes red-rimmed and darting around the property with paranoid, jittery desperation. They looked entirely stripped of their armor, stripped of their unearned arrogance, and completely humiliated by the reality of arriving at their own ancestral home in a budget rideshare. But beneath the visible humiliation, I could see the dangerous, toxic malice radiating from all 3 of them like a physical heat. As they clustered together at the bottom of the grand stone steps, unaware that I was watching their every move through the glass, Reginald pulled his wife and daughter close into a tight huddle, his face twisted into a vicious, feral sneer. I could read the frantic, aggressive gestures of his hands. He was not here to submit to my authority or honor Josephine's memory. He was here to fight a war. He reached into the breast pocket of his suit and partially withdrew a thick folded stack of legal documents, tapping them aggressively against Chantel's chest as he issued rapid instructions. He then slipped his other hand down to his waist, adjusting something heavy and unmistakably metallic concealed beneath the fabric of his jacket. They were plotting one final, desperate physical attempt to corner me in the dining room, force my hand, and violently compel me to sign the trust assets completely over to them before the midnight deadline expired. The camera switches to a gritty handheld tracking shot following right behind Reginald, Vivica, and Chantel as they push open the heavy double oak doors of the ancestral mansion. The frame shakes slightly, mirroring their rising anxiety. The camera pans wildly, capturing their visceral disgust. The grand foyer, once a monument to Black generational wealth, is entirely stripped bare. There are no imported Persian rugs, no crystal chandeliers, no velvet drapery. The bank had repossessed everything of value, leaving only bare floorboards and dust outlines where priceless art used to hang. Their footsteps echo hollowly in the vast empty space. They follow the rich, earthy smell of smoked turkey and spices drifting from the kitchen. I can see the hungry anticipation on their faces as they turn the corner into the grand dining room, expecting a lavish feast to soften the blow of their defeat. Instead, they freeze in the doorway. There is no massive mahogany table. There is no silver service. In the center of the cavernous empty room sits a cheap, scratched plastic folding table illuminated by a single harsh bulb hanging from a frayed wire. 4 rusted metal folding chairs are pushed up to the edges. I sit at the head of the table. In front of me rests a steaming bowl of Grandma Josephine's black-eyed peas and fresh cornbread. In front of the other 3 chairs sit 3 cheap styrofoam cups of cold congealed instant ramen noodles alongside cracked plastic cups filled with lukewarm tap water. Take a seat, I command, gesturing to the metal chairs. The clock is ticking. You need to be officially seated to validate your attendance. Vivica looks at the plastic chair as if it is covered in acid. She wipes the seat with a tissue from her generic tote bag before lowering herself down, her face twisted in absolute revulsion. Chantel collapses into her chair, wrapping her arms around her stomach, staring at the cold ramen with wide, panicked eyes. Reginald remains standing for a long moment, his jaw clenching and unclenching before he finally takes the seat to my right. "What kind of sick joke is this?" Vivica demands, pointing a trembling manicured finger at the styrofoam cup. "We are your family. We are the heirs to the Wilson Empire, and you expect us to eat garbage out of plastic." I take a slow, deliberate bite of my cornbread, savoring the rich flavor before setting my fork down. That garbage is exactly what I survived on for 47 straight days while sleeping in the back of a freezing car. I state, my voice echoing coldly off the bare walls. I ate raw ramen noodles because I could not afford hot water to soften them. I drank water from public bathroom sinks while the 3 of you sat in country clubs spending the money Grandma Josephine bled to build. Tonight, you eat what I ate. Tonight, you experience exactly what you gave me. Reginald's face turns a dark, dangerous shade of crimson. The vein in his neck pulses violently. With a sudden guttural roar of pure rage, he stands up and sweeps his arm across the plastic table. The styrofoam cup flies through the air, hitting the bare wall with a wet slap. Cold noodles and murky broth splatter across the peeling wallpaper, sliding down to the floor in a pathetic mess. "I will not sit here and be humiliated by an ungrateful child," he bellows, slamming both hands flat onto the plastic table, making it shudder. "I built you. I gave you the name that allows you to breathe in these circles. You are nothing without me." I do not flinch. I do not even blink. I just watch him with clinical detachment. Chantel breaks next. She covers her ears, rocking back and forth in the rusted metal chair. "This is psychological torture," she screams, her voice cracking into a hysterical, shrill pitch. "You brought us here to break us. You just want to watch us suffer. You are a monster, Zariah. You are worse than all of them. I cannot do this anymore. I cannot live like this." She buries her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably into the quiet room. Vivica ignores her weeping daughter entirely, pivoting instantly to her most practiced weapon. She reaches across the table, attempting to grasp my hand, but I pull it back smoothly out of her reach. "Zariah, please," Vivica says, her voice dropping an octave, adopting a soft, trembling tone of manufactured heartbreak. "Look at what this money is doing to you. It is turning you cold. We are blood. I carried you inside me. There is a sacred bond of motherhood between us that no amount of anger can erase. I know I was not perfect, but I was trying to prepare you for a cruel world. I was trying to make you strong. You are punishing us because you are hurting inside. Let me help you heal." Just sign the transfer papers and we can go back to being a real family. We can start over. I look at the woman who gave birth to me feeling absolutely nothing. You do not want a daughter, Vivica. You want a bank account. That sacred bond you are talking about dissolved the moment you demanded $1 million to show up tonight. Save your tears. They are boring me. Vivica drops the act instantly, her face hardening into a mask of pure venom. She leans back, crossing her arms over her chest. Reginald suddenly lets out a low, dark chuckle. He straightens his suit jacket and reaches into his breast pocket. The manic desperation from the jail cell is entirely gone, replaced by a cold, triumphant arrogance. You think you are the smartest person in the room, Zariah, he says, pulling out the thick stack of folded legal documents he had shown Chantel in the driveway. You think you anticipated every single angle. But you forgot one crucial detail about power. It does not belong to the person who holds the money. It belongs to the person who controls the narrative. He tosses the heavy stack of papers onto the center of the plastic table. They land with a heavy, definitive thud. I do not look at the papers. I keep my eyes locked directly on his. We did not just come here to eat your pathetic noodles, he sneers, leaning over the table until his face is inches from mine. We brought a judge. He is sitting in a black car at the bottom of the driveway right now, waiting for my signal. We filed an emergency medical injunction 3 hours ago. We have sworn affidavits from your mother, your sister, and 3 of my personal corporate psychiatrists claiming you are suffering from a severe psychotic break. We are claiming you are mentally unfit to inherit or manage the Josephine Trust. The heavy oak dining room doors creaked open behind them. A short, balding man in a rumpled gray suit stepped out of the shadows of the grand hallway. He clutched a scuffed leather briefcase tightly against his chest, his eyes darting nervously around the bare, stripped-down room. This was Judge Eris Thorne, a man whose entire reputation in the Fulton County court system was built on doing quiet, dirty favors for men like my father and Richard Sterling. The camera executes a series of sharp, aggressive whip pans, snapping back and forth between Reginald's triumphant sneer, Thorne's sweating forehead, and my perfectly still composure. Thorne moved to the table, pulling a thick stack of legal documents from his briefcase and slapping them down next to my cold bowl of black-eyed peas. He pushed a gold fountain pen across the cheap plastic folding table toward me. The injunction is already filed, Ms. Wilson Thorne stated, his voice laced with a pathetic attempt at legal authority. I am ordering an immediate psychiatric hold and a full asset freeze pending a comprehensive medical evaluation. If you sign this waiver, we can keep the matter private and avoid a messy public guardianship hearing. If you refuse, I will have you detained by court order tonight. Vivica leaned forward, a predatory smile stretching across her perfectly contoured face. You really thought you could outsmart us? She purred, her voice dripping with venomous satisfaction. You are unstable, Zariah. You have been erratic for years. Everyone knows it. Living in your car, cutting off your family, launching a hostile takeover of your own father's company. These are not the actions of a sane woman. We are just getting you the help you so desperately need. Chantel wiped her tear-stained face, a sudden cruel spark returning to her eyes. You belong in a ward, Zariah. You are crazy. Reginald tapped the gold pen against the plastic table. Sign the paper, he demanded, his voice dropping into a low, dangerous growl. Sign the paper, surrender the trust, and we will make sure you are taken care of in a very comfortable, very quiet facility. I looked at the gold pen. I looked at the stack of fraudulent legal documents. Then I looked directly into Judge Thorne's eyes. I let out a sharp, genuinely amused laugh. The sound cut through the tense air of the dining room like shattered glass. It was not a nervous laugh or a defensive laugh. It was the laugh of a predator watching its prey willingly walk into a locked cage. The camera whip pans accelerate, capturing the sudden faltering of Reginald's confidence as my laughter echoes off the bare walls. You filed an emergency medical injunction in Fulton County, I stated, leaning forward and clasping my hands on the table. That is fascinating, Judge Thorne. It really is, especially considering you no longer have the legal authority to sign a parking ticket, let alone a federal asset freeze. Thorne blinked, the sweat on his forehead suddenly thickening. What are you talking about? I tilted my head, projecting absolute lethal certainty. Did you honestly believe I would dismantle Richard Sterling's offshore shadow accounts and not trace every single wire transfer he ever made? I asked, my voice dropping to a surgical whisper. I know exactly how much Richard paid you to bury the environmental impact reports on his downtown development project 3 years ago. I know about the Cayman Island shell company you set up under your wife's maiden name. I know about the $200,000 wire transfer that cleared your account exactly 12 hours before you miraculously dismissed the embezzlement charges against my father last year. Thorne's face drained of all color. He took a stumbling step backward, bumping into Reginald's rusted metal chair. Ms. Holloway is a very efficient woman. I continued, my tone devoid of any mercy or hesitation. While you were sitting in your car at the bottom of my driveway, waiting for my father's signal, she was submitting the unredacted ledgers of your bribes directly to the State Judicial Ethics Board and the federal prosecutor. You are not here operating as a Judge Thorne. You are an active criminal co-conspirator attempting to extort a federal witness. The panic in Thorne's eyes was absolute and instantaneous. He looked at Reginald with visceral terror. You told me she did not know anything. He stammered, his voice pitching upward in pure, uncontrolled panic. You said this was a simple family dispute. You set me up. Thorne did not wait for an answer. He dropped his briefcase entirely, leaving the fraudulent injunction papers scattered across the plastic table next to the cold, instant ramen. He spun around and sprinted toward the grand foyer, his dress shoes slipping frantically against the bare floorboards. The heavy front doors slammed shut behind him, echoing like a gunshot through the empty mansion. I turned my attention back to my family. The whip pan stopped, settling into a rigid, static, wide shot of the table. Reginald stood frozen, his hand still hovering over his concealed weapon, his entire grand strategy collapsing into dust before his eyes. Vivica's mouth opened and closed silently, unable to comprehend the absolute destruction of their final play. Chantel sank lower into her metal chair, staring at the doorway Thorne had just fled through. I looked at the digital display on my phone resting on the table. The neon numbers shifted perfectly. The clock strikes 8 o'clock. I announced, my voice ringing with absolute, undeniable finality. The mandatory 1-hour dining period mandated by Grandma Josephine's founding charter has officially elapsed. The meal has been served. The surviving heirs are present under the ancestral roof. The conditions of the will have been fully and legally met. The Josephine Trust is completely secured and permanently mine. Reginald let out a guttural sound of pure defeat, his shoulders finally slumping as the absolute reality of his total ruin crushed whatever fight he had left. He had traded his empire, his freedom, and his dignity for a bowl of cold instant noodles. I stood up from the cheap plastic table, smoothing my jacket, preparing to instruct them to leave my property forever. But before I could speak, a new sound interrupted the heavy silence of the dining room. Heavy rhythmic footsteps echoed loudly from the marble foyer, the sharp, authoritative sound of tactical boots marching with absolute purpose. The dining room doorway was suddenly filled with dark uniforms. A dozen armed federal marshals stepped into the room, their hands resting securely on their weapons, their eyes locking directly onto Reginald. The lead marshal, a towering man with a stern, uncompromising face, stepped past the cheap folding table and stopped directly in front of my father. Reginald Wilson, the marshal, stated, his voice a low, authoritative rumble that demanded absolute compliance. You have exactly 2 minutes to vacate these premises. This property is now under the protection of a federal mandate and you are trespassing. Reginald blinked rapidly, his eyes darting from the heavily armed men to me. He pointed a trembling finger in my direction. You called them, he stammered, his voice stripped of all its former booming arrogance. You brought federal agents into our home. This is not your home, I replied, remaining perfectly seated at the head of the plastic table, my hands folded neatly in my lap. It ceased being your home the moment the bank foreclosed on it yesterday morning. You leveraged this estate to cover your embezzlement debts, and you lost it. The bank took full possession. Vivica grabbed the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white. Then what are they doing here? She demanded, her voice shrill and breaking. They are here to enforce the rights of the new legal owner, I stated casually, picking up my water glass. I purchased the estate from the bank at auction this afternoon. I paid in cash using the initial distributions from the Josephine Trust. I bought it free and clear. Reginald let out a sudden, desperate bark of laughter. You bought it, he gasped, wiping sweat from his forehead. You bought the house back. You kept it in the family. Zariah, listen to me. We can work this out. We can stay here. We can rebuild. I know I was harsh, but I was just testing you. I was testing your business acumen. I set the glass down. The sharp clink echoed loudly. I bought it. I agreed, my voice dropping into a deadly serious register. But I am absolutely not keeping it. The desperate hope vanished from my father's face, replaced by cold confusion. I finalized the transfer deed an hour before you arrived. I continued, ensuring every single word landed like a physical blow. I have donated the mansion, the grounds, and the entire estate to the Horizon Initiative. It is a fully funded nonprofit organization dedicated to providing permanent housing, job training, and financial literacy for homeless Black youth in the greater Atlanta area. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a vacuum right before an explosion. You gave our ancestral home to street trash, Vivica shrieked, the sound tearing from her throat like a wounded animal. You gave a $20 million estate to vagrants. We are your blood. We are your family. Grandma Josephine started out as exactly the kind of person you just called street trash, I replied, my voice completely devoid of emotion. She built this empire from nothing. You took her legacy and used it to fund country club memberships and offshore accounts. You despise the very people she came from. Now this house will go back to serving the people who actually need it. The people who are sleeping in their cars tonight, just like you forced me to do. Chantel let out a piercing wail. She threw herself onto the bare floorboards, sobbing uncontrollably. Her designer dress pooled around her as she pounded her fists against the wood, refusing to accept the reality of her total destitution. I cannot go to a shelter, she sobbed, her makeup running down her face in dark, muddy streaks. I am a Wilson. I am Chantel Wilson. The lead marshal signaled to his men. Escort them out, the marshal commanded. Two heavily built officers stepped forward, grabbing Reginald by the arms. He resisted, thrashing wildly, his polished veneer completely destroyed. He looked like a cornered feral animal. I will kill you, Zariah, he screamed, spit flying from his lips as the marshals dragged him backward away from the table. You hear me? I will destroy you. I will end you. Two other officers flanked Vivica. She did not fight them physically, but she turned her head toward me, her face contorted in an ugly mask of pure hatred. You are no daughter of mine, she hissed, venom dripping from every syllable. You are dead to me. You are absolutely dead to me. I know, I replied smoothly. I mourned you a long time ago, Vivica. If a camera were filming this exact sequence, it would execute a slow, steady tracking shot, moving backward down the grand hallway. The frame would capture the absolute pathetic reality of their exit. The camera rolls smoothly backward, maintaining a wide shot as the federal marshals drag the thrashing, screaming Wilson family toward the front doors. Reginald is kicking his dress shoes, scuffing the floorboards, hurling violent, empty threats into the air. Vivica is cursing loudly, her voice echoing off the high ceiling, stripped of all her high society elegance, reduced to nothing but bitter rage. Chantel is practically being carried by two officers, her feet dragging limply behind her as she continues to weep hysterically. The camera continues to pull back, keeping them in the foreground, while I remain perfectly framed in the distant background. I do not stand up. I do not follow them. I sit at the cheap plastic table under the harsh single light bulb, watching them go with complete, unbothered silence. I take another slow bite of cornbread, entirely indifferent to their destruction. The marshals shove them out onto the grand stone steps. The freezing night air whips into the foyer. There is no luxury car waiting for them. The Uber they arrived in is long gone. They are left standing on the cold concrete, shivering in their designer clothes, with absolutely nowhere to go. The heavy oak doors swing shut with a massive booming thud, cutting off their screams and plunging the house back into absolute profound silence. I finally stood up, pushing the metal chair back. The quiet of the empty mansion wrapped around me. The air felt lighter. The oppressive, toxic weight of their presence had been permanently excised from the property. I walked slowly out of the dining room and into the grand parlor. The moonlight spilled through the massive arched windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the cold air. I walked toward the grand stone fireplace. This was the exact spot where Grandma Josephine used to sit in her heavy leather wingback chair, reading balance sheets and drinking black coffee. I stood where her chair used to be, feeling a strange sense of finality. I had honored her legacy. I had protected the trust. I had won. As I turned to leave, my heel caught on the edge of the floor. I looked down. The moonlight illuminated a single wide oak floorboard right where the front leg of her heavy chair used to rest. It was slightly elevated, sitting unevenly against the surrounding planks. I knelt down, running my fingers along the edge of the wood, feeling a distinct, unnatural gap beneath the surface. The camera pushes into an intimate extreme close-up of my hands as I wedge my fingers into the narrow, dusty gap. I apply pressure, lifting upward with deliberate force. The old oak floorboard groans in protest, a sound heavy with decades of history, before popping loose with a sharp, resounding crack. A plume of ancient dust dances in the pale moonlight pouring through the grand windows. Inside the dark, shallow cavity rests a small rectangular object, wrapped carefully in a piece of faded burgundy velvet. I reach down and pull it out, unfolding the soft, delicate fabric to reveal a worn, leather-bound journal. The cover is cracked and weathered, the pages slightly yellowed with age and smelling faintly of the vanilla perfume Grandma Josephine used to wear. I open it carefully, tracing my fingers over the fragile spine. The familiar, elegant cursive handwriting of the woman who raised me fills the very first page. It is dated exactly 1 week before she unexpectedly passed away. My eyes scan the faded blue ink, absorbing the words she had left hidden entirely from me. "My dearest Zariah," she wrote, her voice echoing clearly and warmly in my mind, cutting through the cold emptiness of the house. "If you are reading this, it means the worst has happened. It means my heart failed before I could protect you, and it means Reginald and Vivica have shown you exactly who they are. They will try to break you, my sweet girl. They will try to strip you of your dignity, cast you out into the cold, and steal what I have built. I knew they would. I saw their greed poisoning this family for years, and I knew I could not save them from their own toxic ambition. But I also saw you. I saw your fierce independence. I saw my fire burning bright inside you. You are the only one strong enough to carry the weight of our legacy. Let them underestimate you. Let them plot. But when the time comes, burn their lies to the ground. I love you, Zariah. I have always been so incredibly proud of you." A single warm tear slips down my cheek, landing softly on the yellowed paper, blurring the ink of her signature. The camera slowly tilts up from the worn pages of the journal to capture my face. For the first time in 4 agonizing years, the cold, calculating mask I have worn to survive the armor I built to destroy my enemies completely dissolves. A genuine, soft smile breaks across my features. The heavy, suffocating weight of vengeance falls away from my shoulders, leaving only profound, absolute peace. I am finally free. The camera captures this quiet, beautiful victory before seamlessly transitioning into a sweeping grand crane shot, lifting up high into the cavernous ceiling of the empty mansion, ascending through the grand architecture, and fading out into the cold, glittering night sky. I close the journal, clutching it tightly to my chest like a shield. I turn my back on the empty room and walk out the heavy front doors for the very last time. The freezing night air immediately bites at my skin, but the warmth radiating from my grandmother's final message protects me. I walk down the long, winding, oak-lined driveway, my designer heels clicking a steady, rhythmic beat against the cold pavement. At the bottom of the grand entrance, just outside the heavy wrought iron gates, I see them. Reginald, Vivica, and Chantel are clustered together under the flickering orange glow of a broken street lamp. They are shivering violently, pulling their thin luxury suit jackets and silk dresses tight against the biting winter wind. Without access to their frozen bank accounts, and with their credit cards declined, they cannot even afford a budget ride share. They are forced to wait for the midnight city bus. Vivica spots me first. She lunges toward the iron gate, her face contorted in frantic, ugly desperation. She screams my name, hurling vicious, desperate curses into the freezing air, demanding I give her back her life. Reginald joins her, his face purple with rage, threatening my life, demanding I come back and fix the absolute ruin I have brought down upon his head. Chantel is huddled on the frozen concrete, sobbing uncontrollably into her bare hands, shivering so hard her teeth chatter. I do not stop. I do not slow my pace. I do not turn my head to look at them. I do not offer a single word of gloating pity or closure. I simply walk past them, completely deaf to their frantic screams, totally invisible to their pathetic panic. They are no longer my problem. They are ghosts of a life I have successfully buried and left behind. I approach the sleek black chauffeur-driven Maybach, idling quietly at the curb just beyond the bus stop. My driver steps out immediately, opening the heavy rear door with a respectful, silent nod. I slide into the plush leather interior, the rich warmth of the luxury cabin instantly enveloping me. As the driver closes the door, firmly shutting out the frantic, distant screams of the family I destroyed, I look straight into the camera lens. They called me a criminal. I say, my voice perfectly calm and steady, resonating with absolute power. They called me a failure. They threw me away into the freezing dark and spent 4 years trying to bury me. But they forgot one crucial thing about burying a seed. It grows in the dark. The powerful engine purrs to life. The Maybach pulls smoothly away from the curb, leaving the shivering, broken figures of Reginald, Vivica, and Chantel shrinking rapidly in the rear-view mirror until they are swallowed completely by the unforgiving darkness of the night. The car glides effortlessly toward the glittering, glowing skyline of the city, moving away from the toxic past and driving straight into a brilliant, unwritten future. Cut to black.